She fired him in front of everyone, didn't flinch, didn't hesitate, just pointed at the door like he was something she'd already forgotten. And standing next to him, holding his hand, wearing a backpack with a broken zipper, was an 8-year-old boy who had nowhere else to go. The room full of million-dollar suits went completely silent. Nobody said a word. Nobody defended him. And as Ryan Cole walked toward that elevator with his son beside him, every single person in that building believed they had seen the last of him. They were wrong. Drop a comment with your city. I want to see how far this story travels. Hit like and stay until the very end. You won't believe where this goes. The alarm went off at 5:47 a.m., 13 minutes before it was supposed to. Ryan Cole didn't move right away. He lay on his back staring at the ceiling of the apartment he could barely afford, listening to the radiator knock against the wall, like it had a personal grievance against the building. The bedroom window let in a thin strip of November light, pale and gray, the color of something that hadn't decided yet whether it wanted to show up that day. He reached over and silenced the alarm before it could wake Liam. For a moment, just a moment, he kept his eyes closed and tried to hold on to the quiet. These seconds, before the day fully arrived and pressed its weight down on him, were the only ones that felt like they belonged entirely to him. No decisions, no calculations, no quiet mental arithmetic about what the month's bills looked like against what was in the account. Just the radiator knocking and the gray light and the sound of his son breathing softly in the next room. Then his phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. A text from Sandra, the babysitter. The third babysitter he'd found in 4 months after the first quit because the hours were too unpredictable, and the second moved to her sister's place in Phoenix. So sorry, Ryan. My mom had a fall last night. I'm at the hospital. I can't come today. I'll let you know when things settle down. Really sorry. Ryan read it twice. He set the phone face down on the mattress. Outside, a city bus rumbled past, and the strip of window light shifted slightly. He lay there for 11 seconds. He counted them, before he sat up, ran both hands over his face, and started thinking through the problem the way he always did, methodically, without panic, because panic was a luxury he hadn't been able to afford since the day Claire died. It had been 2 years, 4 months, and 17 days since the accident. He'd stopped counting after the first year, then started again without meaning to, the way some habits dig in so deep they become part of your breathing. Claire had been driving home from her night shift at the hospital. A driver ran a red light on Mercer Street. The paramedics told him she hadn't suffered. He chose to believe that because there was nothing else useful to do with the information. Since then, it had been Ryan and Liam. That was the whole equation. 2 variables, no backup, no margin. He stood up and went to the kitchen to start coffee. The apartment was a 2-bedroom on the 6th floor of a building in the Greystone district, which was one of those neighborhoods that had been almost gentrified for about 15 years without ever fully committing to it. The lobby still had the original tile from the 1970s, cracked in 3 places. The elevator worked maybe 70% of the time. But the super was decent, the walls weren't thin enough to hear every argument next door, and Liam's school was 4 blocks away. Ryan poured water into the machine and stood at the counter while it started heating. I went through the mental list. Mrs. Patterson downstairs was in her late 70s and had bad knees. He'd asked her twice before in emergencies, and each time she'd been gracious about it, but he didn't feel right calling her at 6 in the morning. His neighbor across the hall, Derek, worked nights and would be asleep until noon. His mother was 4 states away in Ohio and had her own health issues that made travel complicated. He thought about calling in, telling his supervisor he had a family emergency, but today was not a day he could call in. Today was the day of the merger presentation. Sterling Nexus was the kind of company that appeared in business magazines under headlines like "The Future Arrives Early" and "How One Woman Rewrote the Rules of Tech." It occupied the top 4 floors of a glass tower in the financial district, and its lobby had the particular kind of design that communicated, without ever saying it directly, that ordinary people did not belong here. Ryan had worked there for 3 years as a senior cybersecurity analyst. He was good at his job. Not just good, genuinely exceptional. The kind of analyst whose instincts caught things that automated systems missed because he understood how attackers thought, not just how systems were built. He had a reputation in the department for being quiet and methodical and nearly impossible to rattle, which was exactly the kind of person you wanted sitting at the controls when something went wrong. The job paid well enough that he could keep the apartment and cover Liam's school and stay slightly ahead of the bills, as long as nothing unexpected happened, which was the constant, fragile condition of his life. as long as nothing unexpected happened. Something unexpected always happened. Today's merger presentation was the single most important event Sterling Nexus had scheduled in the past 18 months. Castellan Group, a massive financial conglomerate with holdings across 12 countries, had been in negotiation with Amelia Sinclair for 8 months. The deal was valued at somewhere above $1 billion, with figures that the company's PR department preferred to describe as transformative rather than specific. Every person on the cybersecurity team had been briefed twice about their role in ensuring the day ran without incident. The network architecture for the secure demonstration environment had taken Ryan's team 11 days to build. He had to be there. He poured his coffee, drank half of it standing at the counter, and then walked down the hall to Liam's room. His son was already half awake, lying on his side with one arm thrown over a spiral notebook that he'd apparently been sketching in before he fell asleep. There were pencil marks on his left hand. There were almost always pencil marks on his left hand. "Hey, bud." Ryan sat on the edge of the bed. "I need to talk to you about something." Liam blinked at him. He had Claire's eyes, dark brown with this particular quality of attention that made you feel like he was processing everything slightly faster than you were saying it. He'd been a quiet kid even before Claire died, but afterward the quiet deepened into something more deliberate. He observed things. He remembered details that other people's eyes slid past without registering. "Sandra can't come today," Ryan said. "Her mom got hurt, and she had to go to the hospital." Liam considered this. "Is her mom okay?" "I don't know yet. I hope so." Ryan looked at his son. "I have a really important meeting today. I have to go in. I tried to think of other options, but I'm running out of time and I don't have one, so I need you to come with me." Liam sat up. "To your work?" "To my work. I know it's not ideal. You'll have to be patient and quiet, and I'll find you a spot where you can sit and draw, and I'll check on you when I can. But I need you to stay close to me and not wander, okay? It's going to be a big day." Liam looked down at the notebook. He opened it and looked at whatever he'd been sketching the night before. Ryan couldn't quite see from the angle, and then closed it and looked back up. "Okay," he said. "Can I bring this?" "Yeah, bring the notebook." "What?" They left the apartment at 7:15. Liam wore his navy blue sweater and the khakis Ryan had ironed the week before for a school picture day that ended up getting rescheduled. His backpack had a broken zipper on the front pocket that Ryan had been meaning to fix for 3 weeks. He kept meaning to fix it. There was always something else that took the time first. On the subway, Liam sat beside Ryan and opened the notebook to a fresh page. He had a thing for drawing systems, not pictures exactly. Not the way most kids his age drew characters or animals or scenes from whatever they were watching on TV. Liam drew connections, webs and loops and sequences, things that flowed from one point to another and circled back. He'd been doing it since he was 5 or 6, and Ryan had no idea where it came from. Claire had been a nurse, methodical and warm. Ryan understood code and logic. Maybe the kid had just assembled something from both of them. Ryan watched the station slide past and ran through the day's timeline in his head. The Castellan representatives were arriving at 9. The secure environment demonstration was scheduled for 10. His team's role was largely monitoring, maintaining the integrity of the isolated network during the demonstration, catching any anomalies, being invisible and effective. The kind of work that nobody noticed when it went right and everybody blamed you for when it went wrong. I was good at that kind of work. He was less certain what he was going to do with Liam for the next 6 hours. The lobby of Sterling Nexus had floor-to-ceiling windows that faced west, and in the morning the light came through at an angle that made the white marble floor look like something expensive had recently been polished to a shine. The reception staff wore charcoal blazers with small silver pins on the lapels. The security checkpoint had biometric scanners installed 18 months ago after Amelia Sinclair decided the old badge system was inadequate. Ryan carried his work bag over one shoulder and held Liam's hand with the other. The security guard at the desk, Marcus, who'd been there for 4 years and knew Ryan by sight, looked at Liam with the mild uncertainty of a man trying to determine the correct professional response to a child in a building where children did not exist. "Morning, Marcus," Ryan said. "Morning, Mr. Cole." Marcus looked at Liam. "Bring a coworker today?" Liam looked up at him. "I'm 8, he said seriously, as if this clarified everything. "Right." Marcus stamped Ryan's badge through the reader and let them pass without further comment. That was one of the things Ryan had always liked about Marcus. Ryan's team occupied a section of the 28th floor, a big open-plan room full of monitors, cable management that never looked quite as organized as it should, and the particular hum of machines doing a lot of work quietly. There were 7 people on shift when he arrived, and every one of them looked up when he walked in with Liam beside him. There was a half-second of silence before Danny Reyes, his deputy lead, stood up from her station. "Sandra couldn't come," Ryan said before she asked. Danny looked at Liam. She had 2 kids of her own, 11 and 9, and her expression had the particular quality of someone who understood the situation completely and immediately. "What's his name again?" "Liam." "Hey, Liam." She crouched down to his level. "We have a really boring setup over here with a lot of screens. Do you like screens?" Liam looked at the room of monitors. "Yes," he said, with a level of conviction that appeared to surprise Danny slightly. "Great. You can sit next to me." Ryan exhaled something that was not quite relief but was adjacent to it. He set up Liam at an empty station near the corner, powered off, safely out of any active system's reach, with his notebook and a cup of apple juice from the break room. He showed Liam where the bathroom was, twice. He told him to stay in this room unless he was with Ryan or Danny, to keep his voice down, and to come find him immediately if he needed anything. Liam nodded the way he always did when he was paying attention, not eagerly, just carefully, like he was filing it all away. Ryan pulled on his headset and started running through the morning's pre-checks. For approximately 90 minutes, everything went according to plan. At 8:53, the elevator doors on the executive floor opened, and the Castellan Group representatives stepped into Sterling Nexus's main conference room. Ryan knew this because Danny pulled up the internal security feed on one of her side monitors and gave him a look that communicated game time without saying anything. He ran one final check on the secure demonstration environment, confirmed all 7 of his team members were at their stations, and told Liam he'd be back in 15 minutes. "Stay here," he said. "I know," Liam said, without looking up from whatever he was drawing. Ryan took the elevator to the executive floor. He'd been up there maybe 6 times in 3 years. It had the quality of a different building entirely, quieter, more deliberate, every surface doing exactly what it was supposed to do. The carpet was a deep gray that absorbed sound. The art on the walls was the kind of art selected by someone who understood that it was meant to communicate something specific about the company without being obvious about it. The main conference room ran almost the full length of the floor, with a window wall that looked out over the city. The table could seat 24. This morning it held 12, 6 Castellan representatives, Amelia Sinclair, her CFO and legal team, and 2 board members who were present largely to demonstrate that the board was stable and unified. The room smelled like fresh coffee and the specific kind of anxiety that people train themselves to perform as confidence. Ryan was not supposed to be in this room. His role was monitoring. He had come up to deliver a brief status confirmation to the head of IT infrastructure, Weston Park, who was standing near the doorway looking like he'd been awake since 4 in the morning, which he probably had. "All green on the network end," Ryan told him. "Secure environment is isolated and clean. No anomalies." Weston nodded. "Good. Keep it that way." Ryan turned to go back to the elevator. I was 3 steps from the door when his phone buzzed in his pocket. The text was from Danny. "Ryan, come back. Liam followed you. He's in the elevator." He turned around. The elevator on the left side of the corridor was already opening, and Liam walked out, backpack over both shoulders, notebook in his hand, looking around the executive floor with the alert, assessing expression he got when he was somewhere new and interesting. "Liam." Ryan crossed the corridor in about 4 steps. He dropped to one knee in front of his son and kept his voice low and even. "I told you to stay in the room." "I know." Liam looked up at him with complete sincerity, but the screen was doing the thing. "What thing?" "The pattern." Liam opened his notebook and pointed to something he'd sketched, a sequence of symbols, looping. "It was on the big screen when the doors opened and I saw it from the elevator and I wanted to tell you." Ryan looked at the sketch. He didn't have time to process it properly. He took Liam's hand and stood up, turning back toward the elevator. "We're going to talk about this downstairs, okay? Right now you have to—" "Ryan," the voice came from behind him. He knew before he turned around. He knew from the quality of the silence that had fallen over the corridor, the way the 2 board members near the conference room doorway had turned their heads, the way Weston Park had gone very still. Amelia Sinclair was 30 years old and had built Sterling Nexus from a three-person startup operating out of a converted warehouse in the South District into a company with 900 employees and a valuation that ended in 9 zeros. She had done this through a combination of genuine intelligence, extraordinary tolerance for discomfort, and a particular quality of will that people who worked close to her described differently depending on how much they respected her. Some called it focus. Some called it ruthlessness. Some called it something else entirely. She was standing in the doorway of the conference room. She was dressed in a charcoal blazer over a white shirt, her dark hair pulled back with the deliberate precision of someone who understood that every element of appearance in a setting like this communicated something. Her eyes, pale gray, the color of the city in November, were fixed on Ryan with an expression that contained nothing warm. Behind her, through the glass wall of the conference room, 12 people were watching. Ryan straightened up. Mr. Cole. Her voice was measured and quiet and had the particular quality of someone who had learned a long time ago that you could make something land harder by saying it softly. What is happening here? My childcare fell through this morning, Ryan said. I had no other options available. I've kept him off the floor and out of all active systems. He's been quiet, and you brought a child into this building. I understand it's irregular, but today was today, Amelia said, and the word had a finality to it, is the single most important day this company has had in 18 months. We have $1 billion partnership in that room. We have 12 guests who came here to assess whether this organization is professional, stable, and capable of operating at the level we've represented ourselves to operate at. She paused. And you brought a child. The corridor was absolutely silent. Ryan looked at her. He thought about explaining the full picture. Sandra's mother, the 4 months of barely working childcare arrangements, the 2 years of managing every moving part of his life alone since the accident, the fact that he had stayed up until 1 in the morning running pre-checks on the network to make sure today went perfectly. He thought about explaining that he was the person most responsible for the thing that was keeping her billion-dollar meeting running cleanly. I didn't say any of it, not because he was afraid, but because he could see from her expression that it wouldn't change anything, and he had enough self-respect not to beg. I understand, he said. You're terminated, effective immediately. She said it the way you might note that a meeting was moved. Please collect your personal items and security will escort you out. Liam's hand was in his. Ryan felt it tighten slightly. From behind Amelia, through the glass wall, one of the Castellan representatives said something to the man next to him. Ryan couldn't hear it. He didn't look at them. He looked at Amelia Sinclair for 2 seconds, long enough to make it clear he wasn't flinching, not long enough to make it a confrontation. And then he turned toward the elevator. Come on, Liam, he said quietly. Liam walked beside him without a word. In the elevator, going down, Ryan stared at the floor indicator above the doors. 27, 26, 25. Liam stood next to him with his notebook clutched against his chest. Dad, he said. Yeah. Are you okay? Ryan looked down at his son. Liam was looking up at him with those dark eyes that had always seen more than they were supposed to. His backpack strap had slipped off one shoulder. The zipper on the front pocket was still broken. Not right now, Ryan said honestly, but I will be. 24 or 23. I'm sorry I got out of the elevator, Liam said. I know. Ryan put his arm around his son's shoulders. It's not your fault. Which was true. None of this was Liam's fault. Ryan knew that with absolute certainty, the same way he knew which things he could control and which ones he couldn't, because figuring out that distinction had become one of the primary survival skills of his life. The elevator hit the lobby floor. The doors opened. He went back to the 28th floor with the security officer assigned to escort him, a quiet woman named Chen, who had the professional decency to stay 2 steps back and let him gather his things without standing over him. Danny was at her station when he walked in. She looked at him, then at Liam, and her face said everything she wasn't saying out loud. It's fine, Ryan told her, even though it clearly wasn't. Can you hold down the environment checks for the next half hour while I get out of here? Ryan, Danny. He said her name quietly. I'm okay. Just tell me you've got it. She held his gaze for a moment, then, I've got it. He packed his personal items into a canvas tote, a photo of Claire and Liam from 2 summers ago, a small plant he'd been keeping on the corner of his desk for a year and a half, a charger, a worn copy of a network security textbook he kept meaning to finish. It took about 4 minutes. Liam watched him pack without asking questions. When Ryan was done, he looked around the space, the monitors, the familiar hum of the machines, the team he'd spent 3 years working alongside. And he had a feeling that was not quite sadness and not quite anger. It was something flatter and heavier than either of those, the particular weight of a door closing. He said goodbye to the team. A few of them said it back. A few of them couldn't quite meet his eyes. Then he picked up the tote and took Liam's hand and walked out. The November air outside the Sterling Nexus building was cold and sharp and had the smell of rain that hadn't arrived yet. Ryan stood on the sidewalk for a moment, tote over one shoulder, and let the cold hit him. Across the street, a food cart was doing steady business with the morning rush. 2 blocks down, someone was arguing on a phone. A pigeon landed near his left foot, decided he wasn't interesting, and left. "Dad," Liam said, looking up at him. "Can we get something to eat? I didn't have breakfast." Ryan looked at his son. 7:47 in the morning, no job, an unknown number of months of financial safety in the account, every problem he'd been carrying already, and this new one added to the pile. "Yeah," he said, "let's find somewhere." They ended up at a place called Pharaoh's, 4 blocks from the tower, a diner that had been in the same location since approximately the Reagan administration and showed no particular interest in updating itself. The booths were red vinyl, slightly cracked. The menus were laminated. The coffee came in heavy ceramic mugs that were slightly too thick to drink from comfortably, which somehow made them feel right. They slid into a booth near the window that looked out onto the street. Ryan ordered coffee and a water. Liam looked at the menu with the focused intensity he brought to all decisions, and eventually ordered a short stack of pancakes and a glass of orange juice. Ryan ordered nothing to eat. He sat with his hands around the ceramic mug and stared at the table. "You should eat something," Liam said, without looking up from the menu. "I'm not hungry. Mom always said you don't eat when you're stressed." Ryan looked up at him. Liam had set the menu down and was looking at Ryan with that particular expression. The one that didn't quite fit on an 8-year-old's face, the one that seemed to belong to someone who had seen more than they should have and developed a kind of quiet patience about it. Ryan didn't know what to say to that. He never knew what to say when Liam referenced Claire with that tone. Not sad, exactly. Not performing grief, just stating something observed. "She wasn't wrong," he said finally. Liam nodded, as if this confirmed something, and opened his notebook. The pancakes arrived, and Liam ate them with the systematic efficiency he brought to most things. He ate a quadrant at a time, working around the plate. Ryan watched him and drank his coffee and did the math that he'd been doing quietly in his head since the elevator. Severance. He'd been there 3 years. They owed him 2 weeks per year, so 6 weeks. Plus the PTO he hadn't used, which was considerable because he'd worked through most of it. Health insurance. He had 30 days of coverage after termination, then COBRA, which was expensive enough to be its own category of problem. Liam's school, tuition wasn't covered by Ryan's employment, but the stability of the salary had been the foundation of everything else. He had maybe 4 months of runway before the real decision started. 4 months to find something equivalent, which was not impossible. He was good at his work. He had a solid resume. He had references, or at least he'd had them this morning. He wasn't sure how today's events would affect what Weston Park and others would say when called. He pulled out his phone and started making a list. Liam ate the last quadrant of his pancakes and set down his fork. He wiped his mouth with the paper napkin. Then he opened his notebook, flipped back a few pages, and studied whatever he'd been sketching. Ryan watched him. "What's that?" Liam turned the notebook around so Ryan could see. It was a sequence, the kind of thing Liam always drew, loops and flows and connections. But this one was more specific than usual. Ryan looked at it. "That's what was on the screen," Liam said, "on the big floor, when the elevator opened." Ryan looked at the sketch more carefully. His son had drawn a repeating sequence that looked like a section of an error recovery log, the kind of code pattern that would appear on a live security monitoring display. Something about it nagged at him, but he couldn't place exactly why. His mind was still full of the morning. "Why'd you draw it?" he asked. Liam considered this for a moment, like he was trying to find the right words. Because it kept doing the same thing over and over, and it wasn't supposed to. Ryan set down his coffee cup. He looked at the sketch. Something in the back of his mind stirred. Not quite recognition, more like the particular feeling of a pattern, making itself known at the edge of your perception, the moment before you fully register what you're seeing. What do you mean, over and over? He asked. Like, Liam took the notebook back and pointed with his pencil. It goes like this, and then it resets back here. Every time. When things break, they're supposed to try something different. But this one doesn't try something different. It just does the same thing and breaks again. Ryan stared at his son. He stared at the sketch. The coffee in his mug had gone slightly cold. Outside the diner window, a taxi honked twice, and the city kept doing what it always did, indifferent and enormous, and completely unaware that a man was sitting in a red vinyl booth looking at a drawing made by an 8-year-old, and feeling the specific sensation of something important shifting into focus. He took the notebook carefully from Liam's hands and looked at the sketch for a long time. Then he took out his own pen and started annotating. He'd been staring at a variation of this problem for 11 days. The secure demonstration environment his team had built for the Castellan presentation was clean. He was certain of that. He'd run the checks himself. But the broader Sterling Nexus security infrastructure had a section of legacy architecture in the recovery protocol that had been flagged for review several months ago and then quietly deprioritized when the merger timeline accelerated and everyone's bandwidth went elsewhere. Ryan had put it on his internal list and marked it non-urgent, address Q1. He'd been meaning to escalate it. He'd been meaning to do a lot of things. Looking at Liam's sketch now, with the cold coffee and the diner noise around him and his employment badge no longer in his pocket, he understood exactly what the boy had seen. The recovery protocol had a recursive loop in it, not a minor bug. A structural flaw, the kind that wouldn't reveal itself under normal conditions, but would catastrophically compound if the system was ever put under serious external pressure. Under a sustained attack, every time the automated defenses tried to rebuild the firewall, the loop would reopen the vulnerability from the inside. The system would fight itself. The more aggressively it tried to recover, the wider the gap would get. Someone trying to push through that gap would find, to their considerable advantage, that the company's own defenses were the primary mechanism keeping the door open for them. Ryan sat completely still for a moment. Then he pulled out his personal phone and dialed Danny's number. She picked up on the second ring. Ryan, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. A pause. Okay. Is the primary recovery protocol on the main infrastructure currently running? Another pause. Longer. Why are you... Danny. Yes, she said, her voice dropping slightly. It triggered about 40 minutes ago. We've been managing it, but Weston said not to escalate because the demo environment is isolated and the primary network issues shouldn't impact. Listen to me. Ryan kept his voice level. There's a recursive loop in the recovery sequence, in the base architecture. Do you understand what I'm saying? Silence. Danny? Say that again. There is a recursive loop. Every time the recovery protocol fires, it reopens the vulnerability instead of closing it. If this started 40 minutes ago and no one has caught it, he heard her breath change on the other end of the line. Okay, she said. Okay. How bad? Ryan looked at the sketch in his son's notebook. Danny, he said, where are you with the main security status right now? What are you seeing? He heard her typing. Then a pause that was 2 seconds too long, and in that 2 seconds Ryan knew. It's not just the recovery protocol, she said quietly. Ryan, we're getting intrusion signatures on the primary network, not the demo environment, the main one. Multiple vectors. This is... She stopped. This is active. Ryan stood up from the booth. Ryan, don't stop the recovery protocol, he said. Not yet. If you stop it cold, it'll lock the breach open. Keep it running and page me everything you're seeing in real time. I'm coming back in. You don't work here anymore. I know. He was already pulling on his jacket. Page me anyway. He dropped $30 on the table for the pancakes and the coffee, and whatever tip covered a man having the worst morning of his last 2 years in your diner. Come on, he said to Liam. Liam had already closed his notebook. He was already putting on his backpack. He hadn't asked a single question. He just stood up. Ryan looked at his son, 8 years old, broken backpack zipper, pencil marks on his left hand, and had a feeling that he couldn't fully name. Something between fear and determination, and something else entirely that he didn't have the right word for. Stay close, he said. Always, said Liam. and they walked out into the cold. The city outside was fully awake now, the morning rush cresting, people moving fast with the particular focused purposefulness of people who know exactly where they're going. Ryan moved through it at a pace just short of a run, Liam keeping up beside him. The kid had always been quick, one of those children who moved like they were anticipating the next step before it arrived. Ryan's phone buzzed again. Danny. He looked at the message. Intrusion confirmed. Multiple access vectors. Weston escalating to Amelia now. Ryan. The loop is exactly where you said. How did you know? He typed back one-handed as he walked. Don't patch the loop yet. I need to walk you through the sequence. I'm 5 minutes out. His phone rang immediately. Danny again. They're not going to let you in, she said when he answered. You were terminated. Security has your badge on the restricted list. Is Weston with Amelia right now? He's heading to the executive floor. Then tell him he needs to let me in. Tell him I know what the attack vector is, and I know why their recovery protocol is making it worse. Ryan, she fired you this morning. I know. In front of the entire board and the Castellan people. I know that too. A beat. You're really walking back in there. Ryan glanced down at Liam, who was keeping pace beside him with his notebook under his arm, watching the street with those steady dark eyes. Yeah, Ryan said. I am. He hung up and kept walking. Later, days later, weeks later, when he'd had enough distance from the morning to actually think about it, clearly, Ryan would not be able to explain to anyone's satisfaction, including his own, what exactly he felt walking back toward that building. It wasn't heroism. He didn't experience it as dramatic or significant. He was cold and tired and recently unemployed and slightly terrified of the math of the next 4 months. And he was doing this specific thing at this specific moment because it was the thing that was correct to do, and because he could see it clearly, and because some part of him, the part that had kept him upright and moving for 2 years, 4 months, and 17 days, simply did not accept the option of walking in a different direction. Also, if he was being honest, his son had figured it out. His 8-year-old had seen the loop from an elevator, through glass, while sketching patterns in a notebook the way he always did. And if Ryan walked away from this now, if he let the thing Liam had seen just disappear into the morning, that would be a different kind of failure entirely. He wasn't doing this for Amelia Sinclair. He wasn't even doing it for Sterling Nexus. I was doing it because his son had seen something true, and the true thing mattered, and something still mattered, regardless of everything else. The glass tower rose ahead of them, catching the gray November light. Ryan pulled open the door. Come on, he said. Liam followed him in. Marcus looked up from the security desk with the expression of a man who had seen a great many things in 4 years of lobby duty and had learned to categorize them quickly. What he saw now, Ryan Cole, walking back through the front doors of a building he'd been escorted out of approximately 90 minutes ago, holding his son's hand, canvas tote over one shoulder, landed somewhere in a category Marcus did not have a clean label for. Mr. Cole, he said carefully. Marcus. Ryan stopped at the desk. I need to go up. I know what you're going to say, and I understand the situation. But I need you to call Donnie Reyes on 28 and ask her to confirm that Weston Park is expecting me. Marcus looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at Liam. Then he picked up the desk phone. Liam stood quietly with his notebook under his arm and watched the lobby security camera with what appeared to be genuine professional interest. Marcus spoke briefly into the phone, listened, and then set it down. He looked at Ryan. Ms. Reyes says Mr. Park is on the executive floor. She says, he paused as if reading from memory. She says, and I'm quoting here, that you need to get up there before Weston buries the whole network in the wrong patch and makes it worse. That's what I'm worried about too. Marcus looked at the screen in front of him where Ryan's badge status still read, terminated, restricted. He looked at the screen for about 3 seconds. Then he opened the side gate. Sign in as a visitor, he said. Officially, I haven't seen you. Ryan signed the visitor log. He wrote his name clearly. It wasn't the kind of morning where he wanted to pretend he was someone else. They took the elevator up. Inside, as the floors ticked past, Ryan's phone buzzed with a message from Danny. He read it, and his jaw tightened. The attack had moved past the initial breach point. 3 secondary systems were showing intrusion signatures. The hackers, whoever they were, had found the loop exactly the way he knew they would, and they were using it precisely the way he'd feared. Each time Sterling Nexus's recovery protocol fired, it rebuilt the outer wall and simultaneously reopened the interior pathway. The architectural flaw sitting 3 layers down where the automated systems couldn't see it. It was like trying to bail water from a boat while someone below the waterline kept drilling new holes. The numbers Danny attached were not abstract. Client data repositories, financial transaction records, the encrypted communication architecture that the Castellan Group had specifically evaluated before agreeing to move forward with the partnership. The attack was not random. Someone had studied this company. Someone had known exactly where to push. Dad, Liam's voice was quiet. Yeah. How bad is it? Ryan looked at his son. Liam was watching him with that careful expression, not anxious exactly, but reading him the way he always did, the way he'd learned to do in the 2 years since the accident, when he'd had to start understanding his father's silences as a kind of secondary communication. Pretty bad, Ryan said. He didn't see the point in softening it. Liam had a reliable instinct for when he was being managed, and he didn't like it. Liam nodded, looked at his notebook. My drawing was right. Your drawing was right. The elevator opened on 28. Danny was already standing at the door to the operations room, and the look on her face confirmed everything the numbers in her text had suggested. She was a woman who maintained composure under pressure with the practiced ease of someone who'd spent years being the calmest person in a crisis, but right now the composure had developed hairline cracks. Her eyes were doing that thing, moving fast, processing fast, that Ryan had learned meant she was holding more information than she was saying out loud. Weston's on the executive floor, she said, dropping her voice as Ryan and Liam walked in. He went up to brief Amelia about 10 minutes ago. He's telling her the recovery protocol is handling it. Ryan, it is not handling it. I know. How far into the client data? The outer encryption layer on the Castellan file architecture is holding, for now. But the authentication pathway into the transaction records... She stopped. She picked up a printed readout from the nearest station and handed it to him without finishing the sentence. The paper said what she couldn't bring herself to say out loud. Ryan looked at it, looked at the room of monitors. His team was at every station, fingers moving, headsets on, the steady controlled urgency of people who were working hard and starting to understand that working hard might not be enough. He pulled off his jacket and hung it on the back of Danny's chair without asking. Okay, he said, here's what's happening and here's why. The recovery protocol has a recursive loop buried in the base architecture, level 3, in the handshake sequence between the outer firewall rebuild and the interior access controller. Every time recovery fires, it reestablishes the exterior wall and simultaneously sends a reset signal to the access controller that briefly, maybe 4 seconds, maybe 6, holds the interior pathway open. 4 to 6 seconds is nothing under normal conditions. Under an active attack with automated intrusion tools running, 4 to 6 seconds is an entire generation of breach attempts. The room had gone quiet. His team was listening. A few of them were already looking at their screens differently. So why don't we just stop the recovery protocol? This came from Kenji, a junior analyst 2 years out of school who had the habit of asking the obvious question before the experienced people got around to it, which was usually either very helpful or very annoying depending on the circumstances. Because if we stop the recovery protocol cold while the attack is active, we lose the exterior wall entirely, Ryan said. Right now the wall is the only thing keeping them out of the Castellan files. We stop the protocol, the wall goes down and stays down. They walk right in. He looked at Danny. We need to access level 3 directly and manually interrupt the loop sequence before we run the next recovery cycle. We basically need to operate on the patient while it's still alive. Danny absorbed this for about 2 seconds. That's going to require direct access to the base architecture. That's not a remote operation. I know. And it's going to require someone who knows that architecture better than... She stopped. She looked at him. You wrote half of that architecture. I know. Amelia terminated you this morning. I'm aware. A short silence. Ryan. Danny's voice dropped further. If you go in there and do this, access the base systems with a terminated badge, make unauthorized modifications to the primary architecture during an active security incident. Even if it works, the legal exposure, I know what the exposure is. He said it quietly, not cutting her off, just stating that he'd already covered this ground internally. I'm not here because of the job, Danny. I'm here because the thing is broken, and I know how to fix it, and the people who are currently making decisions about it don't know what they don't know. He looked at her steadily. Let me do the work. We can figure out the rest of it after. Danny looked at him for a long moment, the kind of look that was doing real work, weighing things, measuring things, deciding something that wasn't trivial. Then she stepped back from her station and gestured at her chair. You know what I think about that decision, she said. But sit down. He sat. Liam found the corner station where he'd been earlier, climbed up on the chair, opened his notebook, and began drawing. Nobody told him to be quiet. The room had already moved past protocol into something more direct. Ryan put on Danny's headset and pulled up the base architecture diagram, and he started to work. The thing about deep systems work, the kind that happens at the level below where most people ever go, is that it requires a particular quality of attention that looks, from the outside, almost like inactivity. Ryan sat at the station and moved slowly and deliberately, not with the urgent rapid-fire energy of someone putting out a fire, but with the focused stillness of someone trying to understand exactly what shape the fire was before they touched it. His team had been operating for an hour under the assumption that this was a standard intrusion event with a malfunctioning recovery response. What he needed them to understand quickly was that the malfunction was structural and that trying to fix it with standard responses was not neutral. It was actively making things worse. He pulled up the level 3 architecture and looked at it. There it was. Exactly what Liam's sketch had shown, buried in the handshake sequence 3 layers down. A loop that was almost elegant in its destructive simplicity. The kind of flaw that looked in isolation like an intentional design choice, a checkpoint meant to hold the pathway open for system verification before closing. It would have passed a standard review. It probably had passed a standard review. Someone would have looked at it and thought, yes, that's a verification step. That makes sense. And it did make sense, in a context where the systems on both sides of the handshake were clean. In a context where an attacker was sitting on the other side of that 4-second window with automated tools running at machine speed, it was a catastrophic gift. Ryan identified the precise point where he needed to make the interruption. His hands were completely steady. He had noticed this about himself over the past 2 years, that his hands were steadiest when everything else was worst. He didn't know if it was a good quality or a bad one. It was simply true. Okay, he said, to the room as much as to Danny specifically. I'm going to need everyone to hold their current positions and not run any additional recovery cycles until I say so. If the automated system triggers one, I need someone to manually override it. Can you hold it? I can hold it, said Kenji immediately. Ryan looked at him. I can definitely hold it, Kenji said, with slightly less certainty. Danny will hold it, Ryan said. Kenji, you watch the intrusion signatures on the eastern partition and tell me immediately if you see movement toward the Castellan authentication gateway. Movement, not just presence. I need to know if they're pushing. Got it. Everyone else, maintain current positions, report anomalies directly to me, and don't do anything creative. Now is not the time to be creative. A few heads nodded. Someone in the back. Priya, who had been with the team for 2 years and had the quality of working very hard while appearing very calm, said quietly, We've got you, Ryan. He turned back to the screen. He worked. It took 23 minutes. They were not easy minutes. Twice the automated recovery system tried to fire, and Danny overrode it, both times with the particular quiet efficiency of someone who was doing something they weren't supposed to be doing and had made their peace with that. Once, Kenji reported movement toward the Castellan gateway. They're probing, not pushing, but they know it's there. And Ryan had to make a decision about whether to accelerate his timeline or hold steady. And he held steady because accelerating would mean cutting a corner, and the corner existed for a reason. At the 12-minute mark, Liam looked up from his notebook. Dad, he said. Not now, bud. I know, but... Liam hesitated. Then, can I come look at the screen for a second? Ryan glanced at Danny. Danny looked at Liam. Something in her expression shifted. Come here, Ryan said. Liam climbed down from the corner chair and walked over. He looked at the level 3 diagram on Ryan's screen. The architecture Ryan had been working in for the past 12 minutes, the loop, the handshake sequence, the modification Ryan was in the process of building. He looked at it for about 10 seconds. Then he picked up a pencil and pointed at the screen, not touching it, just indicating, the way he always did when he was pointing something out in his notebook. This part, he said, right here, that's where it resets. Ryan looked where Liam was pointing. It was not where Ryan had been planning to make the interruption. It was 3 steps earlier in the sequence. Ryan stared at it. He ran the logic forward. If you interrupted it where Liam was pointing, not at the handshake itself, but at the reset trigger that initiated the handshake, you didn't just stop the loop from opening the pathway, you stopped the loop from being entered at all. The recovery protocol would still run. The firewall would still rebuild. But the signal that told the access controller to hold the pathway open for verification would never be sent, because the trigger that generated that signal would be cleanly bypassed. It was not just faster, it was cleaner, structurally cleaner, in a way that Ryan's modification, while correct, was not. He looked at his son. Liam looked back at him with those steady dark eyes, slightly concerned that he'd interrupted, clearly waiting to find out if he'd been helpful or just a distraction. Ryan felt something move through him that he didn't have time to sit with. "You're right," he said quietly. "Go back to your chair." He moved the interruption point. 7 minutes later, he ran the modification. The loop closed. The recovery protocol fired cleanly. One complete cycle, exterior wall rebuilding, interior pathway controller, receiving the correct signal this time, closing and locking without hesitation. The 4 to 6 second window that had been cycling open and shut like a faulty valve for the past hour and a half simply stopped existing. Ryan watched the intrusion signatures on Kenji's monitor. The automated tools on the other side of the breach were suddenly pushing against a wall that wasn't opening anymore. For 10 seconds, they pushed harder, the signature spiking on the monitor the way a wave spikes when it hits something solid. Then they began to fall back, not retreating entirely, not yet, but stalling. Confused, in the way that automated systems could be confused when the environment they were built to exploit stopped behaving the way it was supposed to. "They're backing off the gateway," Kenji said. His voice had a quality in it that he was trying to contain and not quite managing. "Ryan, they're actually backing off." "Don't celebrate yet," Ryan said. "We've closed the loop, but the breach vectors they opened before are still active. We need to go through every access point they touched in the last 2 hours and verify closure individually, every single one. Start with the authentication pathways and work outward. That's going to take— I know how long it's going to take. Start." The room shifted into a different gear. The urgency didn't diminish. If anything, it intensified, but the quality of it changed. Before, it had been the urgency of people running from something gaining on them. Now it was the urgency of people doing work that was within their capacity to do, closing a distance they could actually measure. Danny stood behind Ryan's left shoulder and watched the screens. After a moment, she said very quietly, "You need to go upstairs." Ryan kept his eyes on the monitor. "I'm not done here. Priya can carry the breach point verification. She's good enough. You need to go up to the executive floor and tell Amelia Sinclair what just happened before Weston Park tells her a version of it that doesn't include you." She paused. "Or Liam." Ryan said nothing for a moment. "He fixed it, Ryan." Danny's voice was careful and precise. "Your kid sat in the corner of this room for 2 hours and he fixed $1 billion company's security architecture. That doesn't get to disappear into a version of events where nobody knows about it." Ryan turned to look at her. "I'm just saying," Danny said. Ryan looked at the monitor for another second. Then he stood up. "Priya," he called across the room. Priya looked up from her station. "Ready," she said, before he could give the instruction. She had been ready for the last 10 minutes. She was that kind of professional. "Breach point verification, full sweep, authentication pathways first. Call Danny directly if anything moves." "Understood." Ryan picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. He looked at Liam. Liam was already putting his notebook in his backpack. "You don't have to come," Ryan said. "I know," Liam said. They took the elevator to the executive floor. The corridor was different from how it had been that morning. The quiet that had been deliberate and curated, the quiet of controlled power, was now the quiet of a situation that had moved beyond anyone's control and hadn't quite resolved itself yet. Through the glass wall of the main conference room, Ryan could see the Castellan representatives still at the table. Not all of them. 2 had stepped away from the table and were standing near the far window in a cluster with one of their lawyers, speaking in the low, urgent tones of people assessing damage. The Sterling Nexus board members were still seated, but their posture had the quality of objects that had been slightly moved and not quite put back in the right position. Weston Park was standing outside the conference room door in the corridor, talking into his phone with a clipped, controlled urgency that communicated that things were not going as well as he was trying to suggest. He saw Ryan come off the elevator, and his expression did three things in quick succession: surprise, confusion, and then a complicated mix of relief and something that resembled professional embarrassment. He ended his call. "You shouldn't be here," he said. But he said it without conviction. "The loop is closed," Ryan said. "The breach vectors are being individually verified and sealed. Your recovery protocol is running clean. The Castellan gateway has not been accessed." He paused. "You're welcome." Weston looked at him, then at Liam, then back at Ryan. "How did you—" He stopped. Started again. "When I went up to brief Amelia, the situation was—" "I know what the situation was when you went to brief Amelia. I built the architecture you've been trying to repair. I also know where the flaw was, because I've been meaning to flag it for 2 months and didn't get to it in time." Ryan said that part evenly, without self-pity and without deflection. He had made the error. He was stating it. "Liam spotted the loop signature on the monitoring display this morning when we were leaving. That's what we came back to tell you." Weston looked at Liam again with a different quality of attention this time. Liam met his gaze without any particular expression. He was holding his backpack straps with both hands, standing the way he always stood, straight, patient, waiting to see what happened next. "He's 8 years old," Weston said, not as a challenge, just as a fact he appeared to be struggling to locate in the correct category. "I know how old he is," Ryan said. From behind the conference room door, a voice. Amelia Sinclair's. "Weston," flat. "I'd like an update." A beat of silence in the corridor. Weston looked at Ryan with an expression that was asking something without saying it out loud. Ryan understood what it was asking. He also understood that what he was about to walk into was not going to be comfortable, and that Amelia Sinclair was a woman who did not process inconvenient information gracefully when other people were watching, and that walking back into that room was going to require him to carry himself in a way that made none of this feel like a victory, because it wasn't. He pulled open the conference room door. The room looked up. Every face at that table registered his arrival differently. The Sterling Nexus board members with confusion. The legal team with something that looked like quiet horror. 2 of the Castellan representatives with frank curiosity. They didn't know who he was, only that he was not supposed to be here and was here anyway. The Castellan legal counsel with the focused assessment of someone filing everything away for later. Amelia Sinclair stood at the head of the table with a tablet in her hand, and the expression of a woman who had been managing a crisis for 2 hours on insufficient sleep and was not inclined toward surprises. She looked at Ryan, then at Liam. Her expression didn't change. That was the thing about Amelia Sinclair. She had trained herself over years to not let her face do things she hadn't approved. The board had seen her navigate acquisition failures, hostile press cycles, and a regulatory investigation in year 3 without letting her face communicate anything she hadn't chosen to communicate. She was very good at it, but there was something, a fraction of a second, a shift in her eyes, that Ryan caught before she locked it down. It was not guilt, not yet. It was something closer to recognition, the particular sensation of realizing you are looking at something you should have been looking at all along. "Mr. Cole," she said. "Ms. Sinclair." Ryan stopped about 6 feet from the table. He didn't sit. He didn't step forward. He stood where he was and spoke clearly, without aggression and without apology. Because neither of those was the right tool for this moment. "Your network breach has been contained. The recursive loop in your recovery protocol's base architecture has been manually interrupted, and the protocol is running clean. The breach vectors opened during the attack are currently being individually verified and sealed by your cybersecurity team. The Castellan file architecture and authentication gateway were not accessed. The merger data is intact." Complete silence. One of the Castellan representatives, the one who had been standing near the window, the one who appeared to be the most senior person in the room, slowly lowered himself back into his chair. "The attack is not over," Ryan continued. "The intrusion tools have backed off the primary gateway, but they haven't withdrawn entirely. Your team needs another 2 to 3 hours to fully verify closure on every access point. But the critical vulnerability, the one that was compounding the breach, is gone." He paused. "I'd recommend not running any automated recovery cycles for the next 4 hours while the manual verification is in progress. The protocol will want to fire. Override it manually." "Whoa!" Amelia had not moved. How? She said. It wasn't a full question. It was a word that contained several questions, and he understood which one she was actually asking. He looked at Liam, and for the first time since they'd walked into that room, every head turned. Not toward Ryan, not toward the screens, not toward the status readouts on the wall, but toward the 8-year-old boy standing slightly behind his father's left shoulder, holding his backpack straps, with pencil marks on his hand and a notebook full of sketched patterns under his arm. Liam stood very still under all those eyes. He didn't look nervous exactly. He looked the way he always looked when he was paying close attention to something that interested him, slightly inward, slightly waiting, processing. Ryan let the silence do what it needed to do. Then, into that silence, Liam said, not loudly, not performing for the room, just stating a thing that was true. The pattern kept resetting. It wasn't supposed to reset. When things break, they try something different. But this one didn't try something different, so I drew it. Nobody said anything. One of the board members, the older one, Harrison, who had been on the Sterling Nexus board since the second year, and had the quality of a man who had watched a lot of things happen and developed patience for most of them, looked at the notebook under Liam's arm. "May I?" he said. Liam looked at Ryan. Ryan nodded slightly. Liam walked to the table and set the notebook down, open to the sketch he'd made at the diner that morning. Harrison looked at it. He slid it toward the Castellan senior representative without comment. The representative looked at it. He was quiet for a long time. "This is the recovery loop," the representative said finally. He wasn't asking. "Yes," Ryan said. The representative looked up from the notebook. He looked at Liam. He looked at Ryan. Then he looked at Amelia Sinclair, and whatever was in his expression, Amelia absorbed it without flinching. "Ms. Sinclair," the representative said, and his voice had the quality of a man who was choosing his words with great care, "I think we have several things to discuss." Amelia nodded once. Her eyes moved briefly to Ryan, then to Liam, then to a point somewhere past both of them, and in that moment Ryan thought he saw something shifting behind her face, not collapsing, not breaking, because she was not a woman who did either of those things in rooms full of people, but shifting. The way a structure shifts when something fundamental inside it changes and the exterior hasn't caught up yet. "Yes," she said, "we do." She turned and walked to the window that faced the city, and for just a moment she stood with her back to the room, looking out at the gray November sky, alone with whatever she was working through in the space behind that controlled, carefully maintained exterior. Nobody rushed her. Ryan stood where he was. Liam picked up his notebook from the table and came back to stand beside his father, and without making anything of it, without any announcement, he took Ryan's hand. Ryan held it. Outside, the city moved in its enormous, indifferent way. Taxis and buses and people going places, the endless machinery of a November morning that knew nothing about recursive loops or billion-dollar mergers, or a man who had been escorted out of a building 2 hours ago and had come back because his son had seen something true. The Castellan representative cleared his throat. "Perhaps," he said carefully, "we should take a short recess." And somewhere in the gray light of that executive floor, with the monitors showing green for the first time in 2 hours, and the sound of Amelia Sinclair's breathing, the only thing moving in the room, the morning began. Slowly, unevenly, with no particular grace, to turn. The recess lasted 11 minutes. Ryan knew, because he stood in the corridor outside the conference room and watched the clock on his phone without really seeing it, the numbers moving in the way that numbers move when your mind is somewhere else entirely. Liam sat on the low bench along the corridor wall and drew in his notebook. He was drawing something new. Not systems this time, but a building, the way it looked from the outside, the glass tower with the gray November sky behind it. He drew the way he always drew, deliberately, without second-guessing the line. Weston Park stood a few feet away with his arms crossed, looking at the middle distance with the expression of a man doing extensive internal accounting. Nobody spoke. Ryan thought about the 4 months of runway. He thought about the Cobra paperwork he was going to have to fill out this week. He thought about the fact that he had just spent the better part of 2 hours doing unauthorized work on a terminated badge in a building he'd been escorted from, modifying the primary architecture of a company's security infrastructure during an active breach. He thought about what that looked like from a legal standpoint and arrived at conclusions that were not comfortable. He thought about Liam pointing at the screen with a pencil and being right. He thought about Claire the way he sometimes did in moments that were too large to hold without some kind of anchor. Not with grief exactly, not anymore, but with the particular quality of missing someone whose judgment you respected and who would have known what to think about all of this. Claire had been practical in a way that cut through complication. She would have looked at this morning and said something that was simultaneously obvious and exactly right, the way she always had. I didn't know what she would have said. He never knew anymore. The specific frequency of her thinking was fading slowly, year by year, in the way that he hated and couldn't stop. The conference room door opened. Amelia Sinclair's assistant, a composed young woman named Petra, who had worked for Amelia for 3 years and had the professional demeanor of someone who had processed many surprising situations without ever once allowing her face to comment on them, stepped out and looked at Ryan. "Miss Sinclair would like to speak with you," she said. "Alone." Ryan looked at Liam. "He stays with me," he said. Petra absorbed this without visible reaction. She went back inside. 30 seconds later, she came back out. "Both of you then," she said. The Castellan representatives had moved to a smaller side room off the main conference space, a glass-walled meeting room where they were visible but not audible, clustered around a narrow table with laptops open and phones face up. The Sterling Nexus board members had dispersed to the corridor on the other side of the floor. The legal team was in a separate cluster near the window, speaking in the contained, rapid way of lawyers deciding what something meant before their client had to decide what to do about it. The main conference room held now only Amelia Sinclair. She was standing at the head of the table, not sitting, with her tablet face down in front of her and her hands resting flat on the surface. The room had the quality of a space that had recently held a great deal of noise and tension and was now very quiet in the aftermath. The city moved outside the glass wall. The monitors on the far end still showed the security readouts, green, mostly, with a few amber indicators where Priya's team was still working through the verification sweep. Ryan walked in. Liam walked in beside him. Amelia looked at them both. She looked different from this morning, not dramatically. She was still composed, still deliberate in the way she held herself. But something in the quality of the composition had changed. This morning it had been armor. Now it looked more like effort. "Close the door," she said. Ryan closed it. She didn't tell them to sit. She didn't sit herself. She stood at the head of the table and looked at Ryan with an expression that was working through several things in an order she was apparently still determining. "I owe you an explanation," she said. "You don't," Ryan said. "You had the authority to make the decision you made. You exercised it." That's a very diplomatic way of describing what happened. It's an accurate one. Amelia looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at Liam, who had climbed onto one of the conference room chairs and set his notebook on the table in front of him, not drawing, just sitting with his hands folded on top of it, watching Amelia with the particular quality of attention he brought to things he was trying to understand. She held his gaze longer than Ryan expected. Most adults, when they found themselves being assessed by an 8-year-old with that quality of attention, found somewhere else to look fairly quickly. Amelia didn't look away. "How long have you been drawing systems?" she asked him. Liam considered the question seriously. "Since I was small," he said. "My dad used to work at the table at night and I watched him. The code looked like patterns, so I drew them." "You understood what they were?" "Not at first, but I learned how they moved. When something moves wrong, it looks different. Like..." He opened his notebook and turned to a fresh page and drew, quickly, a simple loop. Then he drew it with a kink in it, a single variation in the sequence. "This one moves right, this one doesn't." He looked up at her. "Once you know what right looks like, wrong is easy to see." Amelia looked at the two drawings. Something crossed her face. Brief, unguarded, the kind of expression that gets through before the control mechanism catches it. Ryan wasn't sure what it was. Not sentimentality. Something more like the particular discomfort of recognizing that you have underestimated something badly and irreversibly, and are now standing in the direct light of that fact. She looked back at Ryan. "Tell me about the loop," she said. "Not the fix, the history of it, when you first saw it." Ryan pulled out a chair and sat down. If she wanted the honest version, she was going to get it, and the honest version required sitting down. Liam swiveled slightly in his chair and waited. "I flagged it internally about 8 weeks ago," Ryan said. "Not as critical, as a scheduled maintenance item, something that would only become a problem under sustained external pressure with specific conditions. I put it in the Q1 backlog. I should have pushed harder on the timeline. He said this without softening it. The merger schedule compressed everyone's bandwidth. Things got deprioritized. This was one of them. By you, by me, and by Weston, who reviewed the backlog in September and approved the priority categorization. But it was my initial assessment, so the error is mine first. Amelia nodded slowly. She was listening the way she did everything, completely, without the quality of waiting for her turn to speak that characterized most people's listening. If the attack hadn't happened today, she said, would you have caught it in Q1? Yes, he said. Almost certainly. The loop was dormant under normal load. It needed an active, sustained, targeted intrusion to become catastrophic. That's not common. He paused. Someone knew it was there. The room went still in a different way. Amelia's eyes sharpened. What do you mean? I mean the attack this morning was not opportunistic. The entry point they used, the specific pressure pattern on the recovery protocol, the timing, the day of the Castellan demonstration, with the secure environment isolated from the primary network, which meant my team's attention was divided between two systems. This was targeted. Someone had detailed knowledge of the architecture and the calendar. Amelia sat down. It was a small movement, and she did it with the same controlled deliberateness she did everything. But Ryan noticed it because in 3 years of working at Sterling Nexus, he could count on one hand the number of times he'd seen Amelia Sinclair sit down in the middle of a conversation rather than at the beginning or end of it. That's a significant claim, she said. I know. I want to be wrong about it. The verification suite Priya's team is running should give us more data. But the pattern is specific enough that I'd want someone looking at the internal access logs going back at least 90 days. Anyone with architectural level knowledge of the recovery protocol who also had access to the merger timeline. He stopped. I'd want to be the one doing that analysis. I understand that's complicated given the current situation. Given that you fired me this morning, he didn't say. It didn't need saying. It was the largest object in the room. Amelia looked at the table for a moment. Not avoiding his gaze, she was thinking, visibly, the way she thought when she was working through something real rather than performing consideration. The Castellan representative, she said. What he said before the recess. I wasn't in the room for that. He said, she stopped, started again differently. He said that the technical competence demonstrated in the response was consistent with the standard he expected from this partnership. He used the word demonstrated, not described. She looked up. He was talking about you and about Liam. Ryan said nothing. He also said that the specific manner in which the vulnerability was identified suggested a level of systems intuition that wasn't typically a product of formal training. He asked if the 8-year-old was available for a summer internship. Her voice was flat and precise, but there was something underneath it that might, in different circumstances, have been something close to dry. He was not entirely joking. Liam looked up from his notebook. What's an internship? It's when a company pays someone less than their worth to see if they want to hire them later, Ryan said. Liam considered this. That sounds unfair. It is, a little, Ryan agreed. Amelia looked at Liam. The expression on her face was doing something that Ryan thought she probably didn't intend to be visible. It was the expression of someone doing arithmetic on a decision they'd made and arriving at an answer they didn't like. She stood up and walked to the window. The city outside was mid-morning now, fully in motion, the November light thinning towards something almost useful. Amelia stood with her back to the room and her arms slightly crossed. Not defensive exactly, more like self-contained, holding something in rather than keeping something out. I need to tell you something, she said to the window. And I need you to understand that I'm not saying it to manage the situation. Ryan waited. She turned around. This morning. She said it carefully, like the words needed to be placed precisely. What I did, the way I did it. She looked at Ryan directly. That was wrong. Ryan held her gaze. I don't mean procedurally wrong. I mean... She stopped, pressed her lips together briefly, continued. I saw you walk through that door with your son, and my immediate response was to calculate the optics. What the Castellan people would think, what the board would think, whether it communicated weakness or disorder. She said this with the quality of someone reading charges against themselves, accurately and without editing. I didn't see a man who'd been up since before 6 trying to solve an impossible problem alone. I saw a variable I hadn't planned for. But Ryan said nothing. I've been treating people as variables for long enough that I don't always notice when I'm doing it anymore. She said this without drama, just stated it. That's not a comfortable thing to admit to the person you spent the morning treating as one. No, Ryan agreed. I imagine it isn't. The silence that followed was not comfortable. It wasn't supposed to be. Ryan didn't try to fill it with something gracious because he didn't feel gracious, and he wasn't willing to pretend he did. She had said something true. He acknowledged it. That was enough for this moment. It was Liam who spoke. Are you sorry? He asked. He asked it the way he asked most things, directly, without accusation, the way a child asks things before they learn that directness makes adults uncomfortable. He was looking at Amelia with those steady eyes, genuinely asking, waiting for a genuine answer. Amelia looked at him for a long moment. Yes, she said. I am. Liam nodded, as if this resolved something, and opened his notebook. Ryan watched his son turn to a new page and begin drawing, already somewhere else in his head, already in the next thing, with the particular ability of children to process large moments and move forward from them without the extended aftermath that adults required. He envied it sometimes. He had learned to move forward, but it never felt quite that clean. He looked back at Amelia. What happens now? He said. She walked back to the table and sat down again, and this time she pulled a legal pad toward her from the side of the table and clicked open a pen, which Ryan understood to mean they were in working territory now, past the part where she was saying the human things and into the part where she was the CEO. The Castellan presentation needs to be rescheduled for 48 hours from now, she said. The network needs to be fully verified before we run the demonstration environment again. I need someone overseeing that verification who understands the architecture the way you do. Weston is good, but he's a manager, not an architect. She looked at Ryan. I need you to do that work. I don't work here. I'm aware. You terminated me this morning, in front of 12 people. I'm aware of that too. She said it without flinching. I'm asking you to come back, with appropriate compensation for this morning and for the work you've just done, and for whatever the next 48 hours require. And after the 48 hours, I'd like to discuss a different arrangement than the one we had. She paused. A better one. Ryan looked at her. This was the part where he was supposed to feel the clean satisfaction of vindication. The part where the arc closed neatly and the morning's humiliation resolved into something that balanced the ledger. He was aware that this was the shape the moment was trying to take. I didn't feel clean satisfaction. He felt tired and cautious, and aware that he had a son who needed health insurance and a rent payment due in 19 days, and aware that those facts were real and present and were part of what informed any decision he made from this point forward. He also felt the particular wariness of a man who has been shown, in a single morning, the exact degree to which his continued presence in this building depended on factors entirely outside his control, and who understood that those factors had not fundamentally changed because the morning had gone the way it had. I'll do the verification work, he said. 48 hours. After that, I want to have a real conversation about what the arrangement looks like, not a brief one, a real one. He met her gaze. And I'd want it in writing before I sign anything. That's reasonable, she said, and I need to make one phone call before I go back downstairs. She nodded. He stepped out into the corridor and called the number he'd been thinking about since the elevator. It rang twice. Ryan. Sandra's voice was quiet, the hospital quiet of someone standing in a corridor outside a waiting room. Is everything okay? I should be asking you that. My mom she's going to be okay. They think. It's her hip. She fell on the back steps. A pause. I'm so sorry about this morning. I know today was important. Don't apologize. I'm glad your mom is going to be okay. He leaned against the corridor wall. I just wanted to let you know. Liam's fine. We're still at the building. It's been a complicated morning, but He stopped, considered the word. He's been remarkable, actually. He always is, Sandra said, with a warmth that was simple and real. Take care of your mom, Ryan said. Don't worry about us. He hung up and stood in the corridor for a moment. Down the hall, through the glass wall of the smaller meeting room, the Castellan representatives were talking. One of them was on his phone. Another was looking at something on a laptop. The senior representative, the one who had looked at Liam's notebook and asked the question that wasn't quite a question, was sitting back in his chair looking at nothing in particular, with the expression of a man who has recently revised his understanding of something important. Ryan went back into the conference room. Amelia was at the head of the table making notes. She looked up when he came in. We should loop Weston in, Ryan said. He's going to need to know the full picture of the internal access log analysis I mentioned. And I want to walk him through the modification I made to the recovery protocol so your team understands what changed and why. It needs to be documented properly. Agreed. She was already writing. I'll have Petra arrange it for... The door opened. Harrison, the older board member who had asked to see Liam's notebook, put his head in. He looked at Ryan with the measured expression of a man who had spent 40 years watching things happen and had learned to identify, fairly quickly, the hinge moments. The points where everything before and everything after were different. Mr. Cole, he said, I won't interrupt. I just wanted to say, on behalf of the board, that what you did this morning was noticed. He paused. Both of you, he added, looking at Liam. Liam looked up from his notebook. Thank you, Harrison said simply. And then he withdrew and closed the door. Liam looked at Ryan. Ryan looked at his son. Does that happen a lot? Liam asked. People saying thank you for math? Ryan almost laughed. It came out as something close to it. A breath, a shift in his face, the closest thing to a laugh he'd managed since 5:47 that morning. Not usually, he said. Said Liam, and went back to his drawing. Amelia watched this exchange from the head of the table. She had her pen in her hand, but she'd stopped writing. She was looking at the two of them with an expression that Ryan noticed but didn't address, because some things were better left in the periphery. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. Okay, he said. Let's talk about the next 48 hours. And for the next 20 minutes, they did exactly that. Going through the verification timeline, the staffing, the rescheduled demonstration parameters, the access log analysis, and who needed to be involved. The documentation of the recovery protocol modification. It was practical, specific work, the kind Ryan was good at, and he moved through it with the same methodical focus he brought to everything. Amelia took notes, asked the right questions, pushed back twice on timeline estimates that she thought were too conservative, and was right both times. At some point during this, Ryan couldn't have said exactly when, Liam got down from his chair, walked around the table, and settled into the chair next to Ryan. Not next to Amelia. Next to Ryan. He didn't ask for anything. He opened his notebook and continued drawing his building. Amelia glanced at him once. She didn't say anything, but Ryan noticed that after that, she stopped holding the pen quite so tightly. They were 40 minutes into the conversation when Danny's voice came through Ryan's phone. A text, 3 words. Clean sweep. Done. Ryan read it. He set the phone down on the table and let out a breath that felt like it had been waiting somewhere in his chest since early morning. Not a theatrical breath, just a quiet release, the kind the body makes when it finishes carrying something heavy. Verification sweep is complete, he said. All breach vectors closed. Amelia set down her pen. She was quiet for a moment. Outside the window, the city was still moving. It was always moving. That was the thing about cities. They had no gear for stopping. And the November light had finally committed to itself, thin and clear, coming through the glass at an angle that caught the edge of the table and made a long pale stripe across the surface. Ms. Sinclair, Ryan said. He'd been thinking about whether to say this and had decided it needed to be said. I want to be clear about something. She looked at him. Liam doesn't work here. He's 8 years old. Whatever the Castellan representative said, whatever gets discussed in the next 48 hours or after. He's a kid who saw something and drew it. That's it. Whatever story comes out of this morning, he's not part of it professionally. He's my son. He said this evenly, but with the particular quality of tone that communicated it was not negotiable. I want that understood. Amelia looked at him. Understood, she said without hesitation. Ryan nodded. He picked up his phone and texted Danny. Good work. Tell the team. Then he looked at Liam, who had finished his drawing and was examining it with the critical squint he always used when assessing whether something needed more work. What do you think? Ryan asked. Liam held up the notebook. The building looked like the building, glass and steel and the gray sky behind it, drawn with a child's confident line, not technically perfect, but somehow accurate in the way that mattered. He'd put a small detail in the lobby windows that Ryan looked at for a moment before he recognized it. 2 small figures, a tall one and a short one, walking in. I think it looks right, Liam said. Ryan looked at the drawing for another second. Yeah, he said, it does. Outside the conference room, through the glass walls, the day was rearranging itself. Weston Park had reappeared in the corridor and was talking to Petra. Two of the Castellan representatives had come out of the side room. The legal teams on both sides were beginning to circulate again, not with the contained urgency of crisis management, but with the different, more deliberate energy of people who were starting to discuss what came next. The morning was not over. In some ways, the morning had barely started. There were calls to make, documentation to write, conversations to have, a network to monitor, and a rescheduled presentation to prepare for. There was the internal access log to analyze and the uncomfortable question of who had known enough about Sterling Nexus's architecture and calendar to design an attack this specific. There was the formal paperwork of reversing a termination and the documentation of exactly what had happened in the operations room that morning, which was going to be a complicated document to write accurately. There was a great deal left to do. Ryan Cole sat in the executive conference room on the 32nd floor of a building he'd been escorted out of at approximately 8:45 in the morning, and he looked at his son's drawing of two small figures walking in, and he thought about the 6 weeks of severance he wasn't going to need after all, and the health insurance that was going to remain in effect, and the rent due in 19 days. I thought about Liam sitting in the corner of the operations room with pencil marks on his hand, drawing the pattern he'd seen from an elevator, being right about it in a way that nobody with a credential in the room had been. He thought about Claire briefly, the way he always did at moments that were too big to hold alone. Then he picked up his pen, turned to the next item on the list, and got back to work. The 48 hours that followed were not clean or triumphant. They were the particular kind of exhausting that accumulates in layers, each hour adding weight to the one before it, until by the end of the second day, Ryan was running on coffee and the specific grim momentum of someone who is committed to finishing a thing and cannot stop until it's done. He worked through the first night. Liam fell asleep on the couch in the 28th floor break room around 9 in the evening, using his backpack as a pillow and his jacket as a blanket, in the unconscious and uncomplicated way that children sleep when they've exhausted themselves being present for something large. Ryan checked on him every hour. Between checks, he sat at his station and worked through the internal access log analysis he'd flagged to Amelia. 90 days of system access records, cross-referenced against the merger timeline documentation, looking for the pattern that would confirm what he already suspected. Danny stayed until midnight. She didn't have to. She had 2 kids at home with her husband and a commute that added 40 minutes to her day, and Ryan told her twice that she could go. She told him twice that she'd go when she felt like going, and stayed until the second sweep of the authentication logs was complete. "You're going to find something," she said before she left. Not a question. "I know," Ryan said. "Is it going to be someone we know?" He looked at the screen for a moment. "I don't know yet." Danny put on her coat. She stood at the door of the operations room and looked back at him. This man she'd worked beside for 3 years, who was now sitting at his own station again under circumstances that neither of them had a clean category for. And she said, "Ryan, for what it's worth, you did the right thing coming back." "I'm not sure it was a choice exactly. Maybe that's what makes it the right thing." She shrugged, the way she did when she was saying something she meant, but didn't want to make too large. "Good night." "Good night, Danny." The operations room was quieter after she left. The overnight team was smaller, 3 people, monitoring, steady, and professional. Ryan worked in the particular focused silence of late-night systems analysis, the world contracting down to the screen in front of him and the data moving through it. He found it at 2:14 in the morning. He sat very still for about 30 seconds after he found it. Then he picked up his phone and sent a single text to Amelia's number, which Petra had given him that afternoon with the careful neutrality of someone conveying information without commenting on its implications. "I need to meet with you first thing tomorrow. Found what I was looking for. You're not going to like it." Her response came back in 4 minutes, which meant she was awake at 2:14 in the morning, which surprised him less than it might have a day ago. 7 a.m. Executive floor. Bring everything. He looked at the data on the screen for another long moment. Then he saved it to 3 separate encrypted locations, printed a hard copy, and went to check on Liam. His son was still asleep, one arm folded under his head, the notebook still clutched loosely in his other hand. He'd been drawing before he fell asleep. Ryan could see the edge of a page covered in small sketched figures, something that looked like a city from above, a grid of streets and connections. Ryan stood in the doorway of the break room and looked at him, There was a specific kind of loneliness that came with these moments, the late-night moments of watching Liam sleep while the rest of the world did the same, being the only one awake, being the wall between the child and everything the child didn't know about yet. Ryan had felt it every night for 2 years, 4 months, and however many days it was now. He'd stopped counting again somewhere in the middle of the afternoon, and he wasn't sure when. He got a thin blanket from the cabinet above the small refrigerator and replaced Liam's jacket with it. Liam didn't stir. Ryan went back to work. The meeting at 7 in the morning was not a comfortable meeting. It was in Amelia's private office rather than the conference room, a space Ryan had never been in before, which turned out to be smaller and less designed than he expected, with a desk that had actual papers on it and a whiteboard along one wall that was covered in handwriting, ideas in various states of development, arrows between concepts, crossed out lines. It looked like the office of someone who actually worked there, which for some reason surprised him. Amelia was already at her desk when Petra showed him in. She had coffee, 2 cups, one of which she gestured toward without comment. Ryan sat down across from her and opened the folder with the printed analysis. "Before I show you this," he said, "I want to make sure we're clear on something. Whatever the outcome of this conversation, I want the process handled correctly. Not quickly, not quietly. Correctly." She looked at him. "Meaning you think I'll be tempted to manage it? Meaning I've seen how companies manage things when the alternative is embarrassing, and I want to say up front that the embarrassing route is the right one." A beat of silence. "Show me," she said. He laid out the analysis on the desk between them. The access logs, the cross-reference timeline, the specific pattern. 17 instances over 61 days of late-night access to the architectural documentation for the recovery protocol, all from a single set of credentials, all at hours and from access points inconsistent with that person's normal working patterns, all within the period immediately following the announcement of the Castellan merger discussions. Amelia looked at the name at the top of the credentials log. She didn't say anything for a long time. The office was quiet. Somewhere on the floor outside, Petra was answering a call. The city was waking up outside the window, gray and cold and committed to another November day. "Marcus Webb," she said finally. Not a question, just saying the name into the room to see how it felt. Marcus Webb was the deputy head of infrastructure. He'd been with Sterling Nexus for 6 years. He'd been passed over for the head of infrastructure position 18 months ago when the board approved a restructuring that consolidated his role under Weston Park, a decision that had been, by all accounts Ryan had ever heard, handled gracefully, professionally, with no apparent bitterness. Apparently. "I could be wrong," Ryan said, because he believed in saying that even when he was fairly certain, he wasn't. "This is circumstantial until it's corroborated. The access logs establish pattern, not intent. You'd need a forensic audit of his personal devices and potentially his financial records to build a full picture. But the pattern is specific enough that I would not continue the Castellan presentation without addressing it first. If we delay the presentation again, I know what it costs. I'm telling you what the risk is of proceeding without knowing." She looked at the page for another moment. Then she closed the folder. "I'll call legal," she said, "and I'll call the board chair." She looked at Ryan. "And I'll call the Castellan representative and tell him we need another 24 hours. She paused. "He's going to ask why. Tell him we identified a potential internal security concern and are addressing it proactively before the demonstration. That's accurate, and it's the kind of thing a company with genuine security integrity does." Ryan held her gaze. "It's actually a stronger position than pretending it didn't happen." She was quiet for a moment. He could see her working through it, the calculation, the angles, the way this played across every relationship and expectation the merger had created. He understood the calculation. He didn't envy it. "You're right," she said. "I know." Something crossed her face at that. Not offense, more like the faintest edge of recognition. "You say that a lot." "I try to only say it when it's true." She looked at him with an expression that was assessing something, deciding something, arriving at something. Then she said, "There's a conversation we need to have, a real one, not about the next 48 hours, about after." I said I wanted that in writing first. You'll have it, but I want to say some things out loud before it becomes a document because documents have a way of making things clean that weren't clean, and this wasn't clean. She set her pen down. "I've been thinking about what Liam said yesterday, in the conference room. When things break, they try something different." Ryan waited. "I haven't tried something different in a long time," she said. I found a way of operating that worked, or that I thought worked, and I kept doing it harder and harder without questioning whether it was still the right approach. And the answer, based on yesterday morning, is that it wasn't. She said this with the same quality she'd brought to everything she said about it. Direct, unsparing, not performing remorse but stating fact. I fired a man who had 2 sleepless nights working to make sure yesterday went perfectly because I saw his child standing next to him and I calculated what it looked like instead of what it meant. Ryan didn't say anything. I don't know how to make that right, she said. I don't think there's a transaction that covers it, but I want to try to do something real with what happened instead of just absorbing it and moving on. Ryan looked at her. He believed her. He had the particular ability, developed over years of working in security, which was fundamentally a field about understanding human behavior, to distinguish between people who were performing sincerity and people who were actually uncomfortable with themselves. Amelia Sinclair was genuinely uncomfortable with herself right now. That was worth something. It wasn't worth everything. Trust was not a switch. It was a structure, and structures took time to build. And the morning of the previous day had established clearly that this one could be demolished in about 4 seconds by a change in circumstance. I appreciate you saying it, he said. I'll hold the rest of my opinion until I see what the conversation after the document looks like. She nodded. It was a fair answer, and she knew it. Ryan picked up his coffee. There's one more thing I want to discuss. Separate from the internal investigation and the merger. Go ahead. My team, specifically Dani Reyes. She stayed until midnight running a second sweep she didn't have to run. Kenji watched the intrusion signatures for 3 hours straight without a break and caught 2 probe attempts on the Castellan gateway before they became something worse. Priya ran the full breach verification sweep with 4 people in under 2 hours, which shouldn't have been possible, and she did it clean. He set the cup down. Those people are good. They were good yesterday before any of this happened. I want to make sure that what they did yesterday is not absorbed into the story of whatever else happened and disappears. Amelia was quiet for a moment. Noted, she said, and then, more carefully, I hear you. There was a knock at the office door. Petra. Mr. Cole, your son is awake. He's asking where you are. Ryan stood up. I'll be back in 10 minutes, he told Amelia. He found Liam in the break room, sitting at the small table with his notebook open and a cup of orange juice that someone on the overnight team had apparently provided. He was drawing again. He looked up when Ryan came in, with the expression of someone who had just woken up in a place they remembered but needed to relocate in the narrative of the previous day. We stayed all night? Liam said. I did. You slept. Oh. Liam considered this. Did you fix it? The network, yes. Some other things are still being worked on. Liam nodded and looked back at his drawing. Then, are we going home today? Ryan sat across from him. After a few more things. Yeah. Can we get breakfast on the way? Absolutely. Liam seemed satisfied with this. He returned to his drawing with the ease of someone for whom the large things and the small things occupied the same space without hierarchy. The network breach and the question of breakfast, both real, both worth addressing in their turn. Ryan sat with him for a few minutes, just sitting, not talking. The break room was quiet. From the operations room down the hall, the soft hum of machines doing their work. The city visible through the window, November light doing its thin best. He thought about the access logs. He thought about Marcus Webb, who had been at Sterling Nexus for 6 years and had apparently spent 61 days photographing architectural documentation in the middle of the night, probably for money, probably a specific amount, probably deposited somewhere that would take a forensic accountant 3 weeks to trace. He thought about the particular sadness of betrayal by someone unremarkable, not a mastermind, not a villain from a story, just a man who'd been passed over for something and made a bad decision about what to do with the feeling. He thought about Amelia Sinclair saying, I haven't tried something different in a long time. He thought about how true that probably was, and how much it probably cost her to say it to someone she'd fired the day before. He thought about Danny's kids, who had woken up 2 mornings in a row to a mother who wasn't there when they got up for school because she was running security sweeps on a network that wasn't even her primary responsibility. He looked at Liam. Hey, he said. Liam looked up. You did good yesterday. Liam blinked. He had a complicated relationship with compliments. He neither dismissed them nor inflated them. He just took them seriously and thought about whether they were accurate. "I just drew what I saw," he said. "I know, that's the thing." Liam considered this for a moment. "Is it going to be okay? The job and everything?" Ryan looked at his son. This was the question Liam had been holding since yesterday morning. Ryan could see it, had seen it in the careful way his son had been moving through the previous 18 hours, present and helpful, and not adding to the load, because Liam understood loads in a way children shouldn't have to. "Yeah," Ryan said. He said it without qualifying it, without the hedge he usually applied to uncertain things. "It's going to be okay." It was not a guarantee. He knew that. The access log investigation was going to be complicated and unpleasant, and would likely involve the board and potentially external authorities, and would cast a shadow over the merger discussions that would take months to fully resolve. The conversation with Amelia about his role going forward was not going to be simple, and the document that came out of it was not going to cover everything that needed covering on the first draft. There were still 19 days until rent was due, and a broken zipper on a backpack he kept meaning to fix. But he had said it, and he meant it, because meaning it mattered, and because Liam needed to hear it, and because Ryan had learned something about certainty in the past 2 years. That it was not the same as the absence of uncertainty. It was what you chose to carry alongside the uncertainty, the thing you decided was true even when you couldn't fully prove it yet. He got up and put his hand briefly on the back of Liam's head, the way he did sometimes, the gesture that didn't need a name, and went back to Amelia's office. The day that followed moved differently than the day before. Still hard, still complex, still full of the particular administrative density of a crisis in resolution, but with a different quality of motion, forward rather than reactive. The forensic investigation into Marcus Webb was initiated through proper channels: legal, the board, an outside firm with the relevant expertise. Weston Park was briefed, and his response was the particular mixture of professional devastation and personal anger that Ryan had expected. Webb had been his colleague for 6 years, and the betrayal was not abstract. The Castellan representative took the additional delay with the quiet equanimity of a man who had seen enough business conducted under complicated circumstances to understand that complications were, essentially, the normal state of business. He said, on the phone with Amelia, something that Ryan heard secondhand from Petra. "A company that finds its own problems is more valuable to me than one that doesn't have any." The rescheduled presentation was set for 72 hours out, not 48, the additional day to allow the investigation to achieve a baseline of clarity before the demonstration ran on the same network. Ryan spent the morning documenting the recovery protocol modification and conducting a 2-hour walkthrough with the full infrastructure team, Weston included, so that every person responsible for the architecture understood exactly what had changed and why. He did this with the same methodical precision he brought to everything, and he did it without any quality of performance or score settling, because the work was the work, and it needed to be done correctly, regardless of the context surrounding it. At noon, Amelia called him to the executive floor. This time there were 2 other people in the room: Harrison, the board member, and a woman Ryan didn't recognize who turned out to be the company's general counsel, a precise and efficient person named Dr. Lena Marsh, who had a reputation for saying complicated things clearly and had apparently reviewed the initial documentation from the morning's meetings overnight. Liam was with Danny on the 28th floor, having been inducted into the informal team ritual of a midday Friday lunch order that Danny had been running for 2 years. Ryan had left him explaining to Kenji why the way Kenji organized his cable management was technically correct but aesthetically problematic. Kenji had appeared to be genuinely reconsidering his choices. The conversation on the executive floor took 90 minutes. Ryan had expected a negotiation. What he got was more interesting than that. A conversation that was genuinely attempting to grapple with a complicated situation rather than manage it toward a predetermined conclusion. Harrison asked questions that suggested he had thought carefully about the structural issues the previous day had exposed, not just the specific incident. Lena Marsh asked questions that were professionally hard-edged and important, and that Ryan answered directly, including the ones that were uncomfortable. Amelia sat at the head of the table and ran the conversation with the focused intelligence that had, he was increasingly understanding, built this company, even if she had spent the last few years applying it in directions that had worn down the people around her. The offer on the table by the end of 90 minutes was this: the head of Cybersecurity division, replacing the existing structure in which the security function reported through infrastructure. a direct report line to Amelia, budget authority, hiring authority, the mandate to rebuild the security architecture from current state into something that matched the scale the company was about to become if the Castellan merger closed, and a compensation package that was, frankly, significantly better than what he'd been making. Ryan read the document. Lena Marsh slid across the table. He read it twice. He asked 6 questions, 4 of which required revisions to specific language in the document, which Lena noted without objection. I want to take 24 hours with this, he said. Of course, Amelia said. And I want to add a clause about flexible scheduling and emergency childcare provisions. Not for me specifically, for the whole security division. It should be policy, not an individual accommodation. A pause. Harrison looked at him with an expression that was unreadable but attentive. Amelia looked at the table for a moment. Then she looked at Lena. Can we add that? We can add that, Lena said. Ryan nodded. He picked up the document and folded it into the inside pocket of his jacket. Walking back to the elevator, he passed the point in the corridor where he'd stood the previous morning when the elevator opened and Liam had walked out with his backpack and his notebook and his broken zipper. The corridor looked the same. The carpet was the same deep gray. The art on the walls was still doing its work of communicating something specific without saying it directly. It felt entirely different. He took the elevator down to 28. Liam was at a station with Kenji, and they were... Ryan stopped in the doorway for a moment to assess what he was seeing, reorganizing Kenji's cable management. Kenji was watching with an expression that suggested he had crossed some threshold from amusement into genuine investment in the outcome. Liam was working with the focused deliberateness he brought to all physical tasks, running each cable along the path that made structural sense, grouping by function. It doesn't affect the performance, Kenji said, not for the first time by the sound of it. I know, Liam said. But if something goes wrong, you have to find it fast. If it's organized, you find it fast. If it's not, he gestured at the previous state of the cables with a look that communicated the rest of the sentence without words. Kenji looked at Ryan in the doorway with an expression that said, Your kid is making me feel bad about my cable management, and I kind of think he's right. Ryan said nothing. He sat down at his station and pulled out the document and read it a third time. Danny appeared at his shoulder. Well, it's good. Define good. Better than good. He looked at her. There's a flexible scheduling clause in it, division-wide. Danny was quiet for a moment. Then, are you serious? Read it yourself. He handed her the relevant section. She read it. She handed it back. I'll say this, she said carefully. Whatever yesterday was, it seems like it moved some things. Yeah. He looked at the document. It moved some things. He sat at his station for a while after that, not working on anything specific, just sitting in the familiar hum of the room, the machines, the people, the low background frequency of a place doing its work. He had spent 3 years in this room. He knew the sound of it the way you know the sound of somewhere you've spent enough time to stop hearing it consciously, until the day you almost lose it, and suddenly the sound comes back to you distinct and specific and worth hearing. His phone buzzed. A text from Sandra. Mom is stable. They moved her to a room. I can come back next week if that still works. He wrote back. Whenever you're ready, no rush, glad she's okay. He set the phone down. From across the room, Liam looked up from the cable management project. He caught his father's eye and gave him the small nod that was their shorthand for "Are you okay?" A thing they had developed without ever naming it, one of the private languages of 2 people who had been the whole equation for a long time. Ryan gave it back. The nod that meant yes. Liam returned to the cables. Outside the windows of the 28th floor, the November afternoon was settling into its gray and early dark, the city lighting up in sections as the daylight withdrew. Ryan watched it for a moment. The building lights coming on, the street lights, the steady motion of traffic 700 feet below. I thought about the document in his jacket pocket. He thought about the 19 days until rent and the broken zipper and the Cobra paperwork he wasn't going to need. He thought about Danny's kids getting their mother home for dinner tonight. He thought about Priya running that sweep in under 2 hours with 4 people. He thought about Liam pointing at a screen with a pencil and being right, and what it meant that an 8-year-old's eye for broken patterns had held a company together on the worst morning it had seen in 18 months. He thought briefly about Marcus Webb, sitting somewhere right now, maybe at home, maybe not knowing yet that the logs had been found, unaware that the 61 days of careful architecture photographing in the middle of the night had been visible in the data all along. There was nothing satisfying about it. That was the thing about genuine betrayals. They weren't satisfying to uncover. They were just sad and complicated and required a lot of paperwork. At 4:45, Liam came and sat next to him. He opened his notebook to the drawing of the building he'd made the previous day, the two small figures walking in through the lobby. He looked at it for a moment. Then he took his pencil and added something. Above the building, in the gray sky he'd sketched, he drew a single line of birds. Not carefully rendered birds, just the simple shorthand of a child's drawing. Small V-shapes, moving. "What are those for?" Ryan asked. Liam considered. "I don't know," he said. "They looked right." Ryan looked at the birds. Small V-shapes against the sketched November sky, moving in some direction the drawing didn't specify. "Yeah," he said. "They do." He put his arm around his son's shoulders. Liam leaned into him slightly. Not dramatically, just the small, easy lean of a kid who is comfortable where he is, and continued looking at his drawing. The operations room hummed around them. The city went on outside. Somewhere above them, Amelia Sinclair was sitting in her office with the kind of thinking that follows a day that forces you to revise your understanding of yourself, and doing the slow, unglamorous work of that revision. Somewhere in the building's base architecture, the recovery protocol ran its clean cycle, no loop, no flaw, no open door, and locked behind itself the way it was always supposed to. And Ryan Cole sat with his son and held the 24 hours he'd asked for, and let the question of what came next stay a question for exactly as long as it needed to. He signed the document on a Tuesday morning, 3 days after the night he'd spent in the operations room, reading access logs until 2 in the morning. He signed it at the small kitchen table in the Greystone apartment, with Liam eating cereal across from him, and the radiator knocking against the wall and the thin winter light coming through the window the way it always did, committed to nothing. Liam watched him sign it. "Is that the job?" he asked. "Yeah," Ryan said. "That's the job." Liam looked at the document with the assessing expression he brought to things. He was deciding how to categorize. "The better one?" "The better one." Liam returned to his cereal. "Okay," he said, as if this resolved a question he'd been holding at a reasonable distance for several days, which it probably had. Ryan capped the pen and looked at the signature on the page. Head of Cybersecurity Division, Sterling Nexus Technologies. Direct report to the CEO. Budget authority. Hiring authority. The flexible scheduling clause, which Lena Marsh had added to the document without further discussion, and which Ryan had read 4 times to make sure it said exactly what it was supposed to say. It said exactly what it was supposed to say. He put the document in the envelope Petra had sent by courier the previous afternoon and set it by the door to take with him. Then he sat at the table with the rest of his coffee and looked at his son eating cereal in the November morning light, and thought about nothing in particular for about 3 minutes, which was the closest thing to rest he'd managed since the week before. Liam finished his cereal and put the bowl in the sink. He picked up his backpack from the hook by the door. The zipper on the front pocket was still broken. Ryan looked at it. "Leave the backpack," he said. Liam looked at him. "Why?" "I'm fixing the zipper before we leave." Liam set the backpack on the table. Ryan got the small repair kit from the kitchen drawer, the one he'd been reaching past for 3 weeks on his way to other things, and sat down and fixed the zipper. It took about 4 minutes. The mechanism had just jumped its track. It needed to be reseated, which was not a complicated operation, just one that required actually stopping to do it. He tested it twice. It ran clean. He handed the backpack back to Liam, who put it on and zipped and unzipped the front pocket twice with the particular satisfaction of something functioning the way it was supposed to. "You could have done that weeks ago," Liam said. "I know," Ryan said. "Let's go." They walked to the subway in the cold, and Ryan thought about the things that accumulate when you're too busy surviving to address them. The broken zippers, the unread books, the forms you mean to file, the architectural flaws you put in the Q1 backlog and don't get back to in time. He thought about how the line between careful prioritization and avoidance was thinner than it looked from the outside, and how you often couldn't tell which side you were on until something forced the question. He thought about Marcus Webb. The investigation had moved faster than Ryan expected, which he attributed partly to the quality of the forensic firm Amelia had hired, and partly to the fact that Webb, when confronted by the company's legal team on the second day, had not attempted to construct an elaborate defense. He had been quiet, and then he had been specific, and the specificity had included the name of the competitor who had approached him through an intermediary 8 months ago, the amount he'd been paid, and the 3 distinct data points he'd provided over the 61 days the logs had recorded. I was not a villain from a story. He was a man who had been passed over for something he'd wanted, and who had been approached at a low moment by someone who understood how to find low moments and apply pressure to them, and who had made a decision that he probably told himself was temporary or minor or justified, and that had turned out to be none of those things. Ryan understood the mechanics of it without forgiving any part of it. Understanding and forgiving were not the same operation. The investigation had been reported to the relevant authorities. The legal process would take months. Ryan was not going to spend those months thinking about Marcus Webb if he could help it. The subway was crowded, the way it was always crowded at this hour. Bodies and movement, and the particular democracy of people from every neighborhood of the city being compressed into the same car by the same morning logic. Liam stood next to Ryan with his hand around the pole and watched the other passengers with the quiet, observational intensity he brought to public spaces, not staring, just noting. He had always been this way in crowds, present but internal, taking in more than he appeared to. At the Greystone stop, a woman got on with a toddler and a stroller and too many bags, and the ordinary small struggle of managing all of it in a moving train unfolded without drama, but with the recognizable texture of a life being carried through the world in pieces. Liam watched. Then he reached out and steadied the edge of the stroller when the train lurched without being asked, and the woman caught his eye and said thank you, and Liam nodded and looked back at the window. Ryan watched his son do this. He thought, where does that come from? The answer was not straightforward. Some of it was temperament. Some of it was the particular education of loss. The 2 years of learning that other people's invisible loads were real because you had been carrying one. Some of it was simply Liam, the specific configuration of who his son was, assembled from pieces Ryan could identify and pieces he couldn't account for and probably never would. He thought about Claire. He thought about her the way he'd been thinking about her lately. Not with the acute grief that had defined the first year, not with the flat exhaustion of the second, but with something that was closer to genuine remembrance, the specific texture of a person, her habit of leaving cabinet doors open, the way she talked about her patients not as cases, but as people with histories she'd memorized, the fact that she had named Liam after her grandfather, a man who had repaired watches for 40 years in a small shop in the city, because she said people who fixed things that other people had given up on were worth remembering. He hadn't thought about the watch repair shop in a long time. He thought about it now, on the subway, watching his son steady a stranger's stroller. He thought, she would have understood this week in a way I'm still working toward. The subway arrived at the financial district stop, and they came up into the cold morning air, the glass tower visible 2 blocks away, catching the light. Ryan had been walking into this building for 3 years. He knew the lobby tile and the biometric scanner and the way Marcus, Lobby Marcus, not Marcus Webb, greeted the morning regulars. He knew the particular sound the elevator made on the 28th floor, a small mechanical hesitation before the doors opened, like someone clearing their throat before speaking. He knew all of it. It was familiar in the way that familiar things are before something shifts, and then afterward you notice the familiarity differently, not as background, but as something specific and chosen. He walked in. Marcus at the desk looked up. He looked at Ryan, then at Liam, and then he smiled, genuinely, without the professional uncertainty of the first morning. Mr. Cole, back again. Back again, Ryan said. Permanent this time? Looks like it. Marcus looked at Liam. You going to be a regular? Liam considered this seriously. Probably not every day, he said, but sometimes. I'll put you in the system, Marcus said, which was almost certainly not a real option but was the right thing to say, and Liam appeared to file it as such. They took the elevator up. The first week in the new role was not a coronation. Ryan had not expected it to be. The division had functioned under a particular structure for years, and changing that structure, even when everyone agreed the change was necessary, required the slow, unglamorous work of convincing people that the change was real, and not just a title on a new org chart. There were team members who had been comfortable with the old approach and were watching to see whether this new one was going to actually mean anything. There were people in other divisions who were skeptical of the reporting change and what it meant for their own domains. There was the ongoing forensic investigation into the breach, which required Ryan's participation at unpredictable intervals and had a way of surfacing uncomfortable questions about the period before he'd been hired, about decisions made before his time, about the general condition of a system that had grown fast and had not always grown carefully. He navigated all of it with the same methodology he applied to systems work. Understand the architecture before you modify it. Identify the actual problem before you build the solution. Don't apply elegant fixes to incorrectly diagnosed faults. He made some mistakes. He moved too fast on a restructuring proposal in the second week and had to reverse course after a conversation with Priya that was honest and slightly uncomfortable and ended with him revising his timeline and his assumptions. He underestimated the political complexity of the relationship between his division and the infrastructure team, Weston's domain, and had to spend 3 hours in a conversation with Weston that required more patience than he naturally possessed, resolving a tension that should have been addressed in the first week. I was not a perfect leader. He knew this about himself. He was precise and demanding and had high standards that not everyone found easy to work alongside. And he had a tendency, when under pressure, to go internal in a way that could read as cold. He knew these things. He worked on them, with uneven results, in the way that people work on the things they know about themselves, sincerely, incompletely, making the same mistakes in new forms. Danny remained his deputy. This was not a surprise to either of them. She was the right person for it, and they both knew it, and the conversation about it had lasted approximately 90 seconds before moving on to logistics. The flexible scheduling clause went into effect across the division on the first day of the new structure. Danny used it for the first time in the third week, leaving at 2 in the afternoon for a school event that she had previously scheduled around 3 times before actually attending. She came back the next morning and said nothing about it, and Ryan said nothing about it, and Kenji said, because Kenji was Kenji, how was the concert? And Danny said good, and that was the extent of it, which was exactly the extent it needed to be. The Castellan presentation ran cleanly on the rescheduled date. Ryan's team ran the security monitoring from the 28th floor, while Ryan stood in the executive conference room, not presenting, not performing, just available, because Amelia had asked him to be there, and because his presence meant something to the Castellan representative that was more specific than his function. The demonstration ran for 4 hours and produced no incidents. The isolated environment held. The primary network held. Every check came back clean. At the end of the 4 hours, the Castellan senior representative shook hands with Amelia and said, with the careful precision of a man who chose every word deliberately, "This is the kind of organization we were hoping to find." He looked at Ryan when he said it. Ryan received this without comment, because receiving it with comment would have made it about something other than what it was. The merger closed 6 weeks later. Ryan was not in the room for the signing. That was Amelia's event, and the boards, and the Castellan leaderships, as it should have been. He was on the 28th floor running a routine verification sweep when Danny got the notification and told the room. There was a moment of genuine satisfaction among the team, the particular satisfaction of people who had held something together during the worst of it and could now see the result. Priya smiled her quiet smile. Kenji made a noise that was technically professional and barely. The overnight analyst, a reserved young man named Todd, who had been with the division for 8 months and had worked through the entire breach without being named in any subsequent account of it, looked up from his station and said simply, "Good." Ryan called Liam after. His son was at school. He got the call on the classroom phone at the front office, as they'd arranged for important calls, and the school secretary put him through with the particular tolerant warmth of a woman who had been managing this kind of arrangement for many years. "Hey, bud. Dad. Is everything okay?" "Everything's great. I just wanted to tell you, the thing closed, the merger. It happened." A pause. "Because of the loop?" Liam said. "Partly. Because of a lot of things. But yeah, partly because of the loop." Another pause. Ryan could hear the ambient sound of a school hallway, locker doors and voices and the distant public address system. "Okay," Liam said. "Okay? I mean, good. That's good." He sounded slightly distracted, the way he sounded when he was holding 2 things in his attention at once. "Dad, can I tell you something?" "Yeah. I think I figured out why the recovery protocol had the loop in the first place." Ryan was quiet for a moment. "Tell me later. You're at school." "I know, but I've been thinking about it, and I think the person who built it was thinking about it from the wrong direction. They were thinking about how to keep things out, so they built the verification as a safety check pointing outward. But the vulnerability was inward. If you build your safety checks pointing the wrong direction, Liam, yeah? We'll talk about it tonight. Go back to class. A pause. Then, okay, but I'm right. I know you're right. Go to class. He hung up and stood at his station for a moment, holding the phone, with the particular feeling of being a parent of a specific kind of child, the kind that sees things you didn't see and then explains them to you with the calm certainty of someone who found them obvious, and the particular love and bewilderment that combination produces. He thought about the loop, inward versus outward. He thought Liam probably was right in the way he was usually right when he said he was, not always, but often enough that Ryan had learned to take it seriously rather than the way most adults learn to receive a child's certainty, which was with affectionate dismissal. He wrote it down. He had been writing down Liam's observations for a few months now, in a notebook he kept in his desk drawer. Not systematically, not for any specific purpose, just because the observations had a quality that seemed worth preserving. The record was accumulating in the way that things accumulate when you start paying attention to them. The months that followed the merger were not dramatic. This was worth saying because the temptation in any account of this period would be to find the dramatic arc and follow it. And the truth was that most of what happened in those months was ordinary work, done carefully and repeatedly, producing results that were not visible in a single moment, but accreted over time into something real. Ryan rebuilt the security architecture in stages, working from the vulnerabilities the breach had exposed outward into the systems that surrounded them, then outward again. He hired 3 new analysts, all of whom he'd screened personally, all of whom he'd interviewed at length, and integrated them into the team with the deliberate patience of a builder who understands that you cannot rush the curing time on certain materials. He ran monthly full system reviews that had previously been quarterly. He established a reporting protocol that brought security concerns directly to his desk without passing through 3 layers of middle management that had historically functioned as a dampening mechanism rather than an accelerant. None of this made the news. None of it was celebrated at a company event. It was the kind of work that existed below the threshold of visibility, which was exactly where Ryan preferred to do his work. His relationship with Amelia was its own distinct, complicated thing. It was professional, genuinely professional, not the performance of professionalism that masks something unresolved. They had different strengths, and they both knew it. She understood organizational dynamics and capital and the mechanics of large-scale decisions with a precision that Ryan admired without possessing. Understood systems and risk and the specific ways that human error embedded itself in technical architecture, and she respected this in a way that felt earned rather than performed. They disagreed with some regularity on timing and approach. Amelia had an instinct for acceleration, for moving fast, for compressing timelines, for treating caution as a form of failure. Ryan had an instinct for the opposite, for the deliberate pace that allowed each step to be load-bearing before the next step was taken. These instincts produced friction. The friction was, most of the time, productive. Not always. There were 3 or 4 conversations across the year that ended not resolved but suspended, both of them holding their position, the issue tabled not because it was settled, but because continuing wasn't useful. Ryan kept those conversations in a mental file. He'd learned that the unsettled things were often more informative than the settled ones. Amelia changed in the way that people who are paying attention to themselves change, incrementally, unevenly, in patterns that were more visible in aggregate than in any specific moment. She started doing something that Ryan noticed about 4 months in. She was asking questions before making decisions that 6 months earlier she would have made by instinct. Not all decisions, not every time, but often enough that the pattern was recognizable. She was building in the pause that she hadn't previously had room for. Whether this was permanent or situational, whether it would hold under the next real pressure, or revert, Ryan genuinely didn't know. He held the observation without drawing the conclusion. He gave her the benefit of the doubt. Not because she'd earned a blank slate, she hadn't, and he didn't operate that way, but because the benefit of the doubt was the correct tool for a situation that was still in progress, and Ryan believed in using the correct tool. 8 months after the breach, the annual Innovation Conference arrived. Sterling Nexus held it every year at the main convention space 2 blocks from the tower, a full-day event for employees and partners and selected press, a combination of formal presentations and demonstration showcases, and the particular organized social energy of a company presenting its best version of itself to itself. Ryan had attended twice before, both times as a team member with no particular role in the proceedings. This year was different. Amelia had told him 2 weeks before that she wanted him on stage. He had said, with the directness he'd stopped apologizing for, that he didn't want to be on stage. She had said that this wasn't entirely about what either of them wanted. He had said he'd think about it. He'd thought about it for a week and then said yes, on the condition that Liam was not part of any scripted presentation. I understand, Amelia said. I mean it, Ryan said. He's 9. He doesn't need to be a story. I understand, she said again, and something in her tone communicated that she had thought about this and had arrived at the same place, which he believed. The morning of the conference, Ryan stood in the kitchen at 6:45 and tied his tie, which he had not worn in some time, and which he tied incorrectly on the first attempt and correctly on the second. Liam watched him from the kitchen table with the expression he reserved for his father, doing things that he found slightly absurd. You look weird in a tie, Liam said. Thank you. You look fine. Just different. Different is okay. Liam was eating toast and had his notebook in front of him, open to a page covered in a dense, complex diagram that had been evolving for about 2 weeks. It looked like nothing so much as a city viewed from directly above, blocks and connections, and the lines between them indicating flow, traffic, the movement of things between fixed points. Ryan had looked at it several times and each time saw something new in it, some additional layer of structure that hadn't been visible before. I didn't know what to call it. Liam had not offered a title. You're coming later? Ryan said. Sandra's bringing me at 2. Sandra's mother had recovered from the hip surgery, slowly, and with the difficulty that hip surgeries in women in their 70s involve, but recovered. Sandra was back 3 days a week and had developed over the months a relationship with Liam. That was its own distinct thing. She had started bringing him books about systems and engineering from the public library, a running loan that they kept track of in a small notebook she kept in her bag. It was not part of her job description. She just did it. The 2 o'clock session, Ryan confirmed. I know, you said twice already. I know I said it twice. Liam looked at him. Are you nervous? Ryan straightened the tie. A little. About the stage part or the other part? Ryan looked at his son. What other part? Liam shrugged in the way that communicated he was not going to elaborate but had said something real. He looked back at his notebook. Ryan finished with the tie and got his jacket from the chair. He stood at the door for a moment, looking at Liam at the table. 9 years old, toast in one hand, pencil in the other, the notebook open in front of him, and the diagram spreading across the page with its patient, intricate logic. The backpack was hanging on its hook by the door, the zipper running clean every time. I thought about the morning 10 months ago. The alarm at 5:47. Sandra's text. The subway ride with Liam drawing patterns while Ryan calculated runway. The lobby, the biometric scanner, the elevator, the corridor on the executive floor, and the particular silence that had fallen when Amelia Sinclair appeared in the conference room doorway. He thought about the elevator going down. 27, 26, 25. Liam saying, "Are you okay?" Ryan saying, "Not right now, but I will be." He had not known that was true when he said it. He had said it because it needed to be said, and because he intended for it to become true, which is not the same as knowing. But it had, not cleanly, not without cost, not without the months of difficult ordinary work and the mistakes he'd made and the conversations that ended suspended rather than resolved, but genuinely, in the way that things become true when you do the work of making them true. Not perfectly, not finally, but enough. He said, "I'll see you at 2 and Liam said, "I know, Dad," without looking up, and Ryan went to the conference. The morning sessions ran without incident. Ryan sat in the audience for 3 presentations, participated in a roundtable on infrastructure security that drew more attendees than the organizers had anticipated, and spent 20 minutes in a hallway conversation with 2 engineers from the Castellan side who had questions about the modified recovery protocol that were the right kind of questions, specific, structural, genuinely curious. He ate lunch at a table with Danny and Priya and Kenji and Todd and 2 of the new analysts, and the conversation was the way conversations are when people have worked through something difficult together, easy in a way that has been earned rather than assumed. At 1:45, Sandra arrived with Liam. Liam was wearing the navy blue sweater. He had his notebook. He He looked at the conference hall with the particular expression of a child assessing a large room. Not awed, just noting. Ryan brought them to seats in the third row, near the aisle, where Liam could see the stage clearly and had room to draw if the proceedings became more interesting on paper than in person. The afternoon session opened with company metrics and merger updates, the formal business of a year reviewed. Then Harrison, the board member, spoke briefly about what he called the company's evolution, a word he used carefully, with the specificity of someone who knew the word covered things he was choosing not to name directly, and trusted the audience to fill in the context they had. Then Amelia took the stage. She was not a practiced public speaker in the conventional sense. She didn't have the performed warmth of executives who had trained themselves to perform warmth, and she knew it and didn't try to compensate for it. She spoke the way she thought, which was directly and with precision, and it worked because the precision itself communicated a kind of respect for the audience. She talked about the year, about the merger and what it meant for the company's next phase, about the security infrastructure rebuild and what it represented in terms of the company's commitment to doing things correctly rather than quickly. She named Danny's team specifically, by name, all of them, including Todd, which Ryan noticed and noted. Then she stopped. Ryan, she looked out at the room for a moment, just a moment, with the expression of someone about to say something they have been working up to for a while. I want to talk about something that doesn't usually get said at events like this, she said. Companies are very good at presenting their successes as the product of strategy and foresight. We're less good at being honest about the moments when a success was actually the product of someone else catching what we missed. And we're even less good at being honest about the moments when we behaved badly on the way to getting it right. The room was quiet. 10 months ago, I made a decision that I want to acknowledge publicly. I fired a member of this team, in front of our board, in front of our merger partners, because he arrived at work with his young son, and I decided that was a disruption I wasn't willing to accommodate. I made that decision in about 4 seconds. I didn't ask any questions. I didn't account for the fact that he was here because he had nowhere else to take his child, that he was a single parent managing an impossible set of circumstances alone, or that he had spent 2 sleepless nights making sure that day went exactly the way it needed to go. She paused. I made a calculation about optics, and I called it a decision. And then the same child I was trying to remove from my building went on to identify the security vulnerability that had defeated an entire technical team. And his father came back on a terminated badge and fixed it. The room was still. Ryan looked at his hands. Liam was drawing in his notebook. He had not stopped drawing, but his pencil had slowed. I'm telling this story not because it ends well, Amelia said, which it does, relatively. I'm telling it because the part before the ending is more important. The part where I had decided that efficiency and optics were more important than seeing a person clearly. That's not a policy failure. That's a personal one. And I spent a year trying to understand how I got there and what it means to try to operate differently. She looked out at the room. I don't think I've fully figured that out yet, she said. I want to be honest about that too. Changing the way you think is slower than changing the way you act. And I've been better at the second than the first. But I'm working on it. She reached to the side of the podium and picked up something Ryan hadn't noticed. A small crystal object, rectangular, the kind of award that usually got handed out at these events with a title etched on the base. This year's innovation recognition goes to someone who isn't an employee of this company and who is, frankly, too young to have a job here, which may need to be revisited in about 8 years. The room made a sound that was partly laughter and partly something else, less categorizable. But what he contributed to this company, not just the technical insight, but the way he saw a problem that no one else saw and drew it down on paper because that's what he does, that deserves to be named. She looked at the third row. Liam Cole, she said. Ryan looked at his son. Liam had stopped drawing. He was looking at the stage with his pencil in his hand and his notebook open in his lap, and an expression that Ryan had not seen before on his son's face, which was not pride exactly, and not embarrassment exactly, but something in between those things. The expression of someone who is being seen clearly for the first time in a room full of people and is working out how to receive that. Ryan put his hand on Liam's back. Liam looked at him. Ryan said nothing. He tilted his head toward the stage. Go on. And Liam looked back at the stage and then at Ryan again, checking, and Ryan nodded. Liam got up. He walked up the aisle with his notebook under his arm and his navy blue sweater and his backpack over one shoulder, because he had not left it in his seat. and the audience in the room watched this 9-year-old walk toward the stage with the unhurried deliberateness of someone who was paying attention to where he was going. He climbed the steps to the stage. Amelia crouched down slightly to be at his level, not in a performative way, just practically, because he was small and the microphone was tall, and she was trying to communicate person to person rather than CEO to child. She held out the crystal award. Liam looked at it. He looked at the words etched on the base, reading them. Then he took it with both hands, the way you take something you intend to handle carefully. He looked out at the room. The room was watching him with the particular quality of attention that collects when a moment is recognizing itself as a moment. Liam said, into the microphone that Amelia was holding toward him, "My dad fixed it. I just drew what I saw." The room answered this with the kind of sound that is not quite applause and not quite silence, but lives in the space between them. A sound that had feeling in it, compressed and real. The sound of a room full of people being moved by something that was not complicated and did not need to be made more than it was. Then the applause came, and it was full. Ryan was in his seat in the third row with his hands in his lap, and his throat doing something he did not try to stop, and he thought about Claire. Not with grief this time, not with the particular ache of missing, but with something closer to gratitude, which surprised him, because gratitude had been hard to locate for a long time. He thought, she would have loved this. He thought, she does, somewhere. He let himself think it without immediately pulling it apart. Liam came back down the steps and walked back up the aisle and sat next to Ryan. He set the award on the seat beside him and opened his notebook and looked at where he'd stopped drawing. Ryan looked at the side of his son's face. "You okay?" he said quietly. "Yeah." Liam picked up his pencil. "She said I just drew what I saw, but that's not exactly right." "What do you mean?" Liam was quiet for a moment, looking at the diagram in his notebook, the city from above, the dense network of connections and flows. "I drew what I understood. There's a difference. Lots of people see things. Not everyone understands what they're looking at." Ryan looked at his son. He thought, 9 years old. He thought about everything that sentence contained, about the 2 years of watching his father work, of drawing patterns in notebooks because the patterns made sense when other things didn't, of sitting in the corner of an operations room during a crisis with pencil marks on his hand, being right about something in a way that nobody had expected, and that Liam himself had not understood to be exceptional because it was simply the way he had always moved through the world. He thought about the loop in the recovery protocol, and how Liam had said, on a school office phone, weeks after the fact, that the person who built it had been thinking from the wrong direction, outward when the problem was inward. Ryan had spent a week thinking about that, and had arrived somewhere he couldn't quite articulate. Something about the general tendency to build defenses that faced the direction of the last threat rather than the actual one. About the ways that very smart systems failed because they were built by people who understood everything except where they were standing. He had written it in the notebook in his desk drawer. He had not figured out what to do with it yet. He thought maybe it was simply worth keeping. "You're right," he said to Liam. "There's a difference." Liam nodded and went back to drawing. His pencil moved across the page with the comfortable ease of someone doing the thing they were made to do, the thing that came from somewhere so deep in their nature that it didn't require effort, just direction. The conference continued around them. The afternoon moved through its program, and people came and went, and said things that would be remembered and things that would be forgotten, and the merger was celebrated and the year was reviewed and plans were made for what came next. At some point, Ryan looked up and saw Amelia standing at the edge of the stage, not presenting, just watching the room. She caught his eye across the distance. She gave him a nod, simple, clean, the nod of one person acknowledging another without making it larger than it was. He nodded back. Outside the convention hall, the November city had gone dark in the early way of November, the streetlights on, and the buildings lit, and the cold sharp and real against anyone who stepped through the doors. It was the same cold as a year ago, the same city, the same darkness arriving early, and the lights coming up to answer it, the same indifferent, enormous machinery of a place that knew nothing about the people moving through it and kept moving anyway. Ryan Cole was not the same person who had stood on that sidewalk outside the Sterling Nexus Tower a year ago with a canvas tote and a terminated badge and a son whose backpack zipper was broken. He was not better in all the ways that word implied, and he was not worse. He was further down the road from that morning, which was not the same as healed or resolved or finished, because none of those things were how people actually worked, but was its own true thing. He was further down the road. That was enough. He picked up Liam's backpack from under the seat. Liam had migrated to the floor at some point in the past hour and was now sitting cross-legged on the carpet, drawing with the award propped against his knee, and stood up. "Ready to go home?" he said. Liam looked at the diagram in progress. He looked at it for a moment with the critical squint of someone deciding whether a thing was done. Then he closed the notebook. "Yeah," he said. He picked up the award. He looked at it once more, the words etched on the base, the light catching the crystal. Then he put it in his backpack and zipped the pocket closed, smoothly, the way a fixed thing runs. And they walked out together into the cold.